Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it was in the 1980s. I was a young 25-year-old girl at the time, employed by a prominent newspaper. I worked on the advice columnist platform with an older woman in her 60s, who was a proficient, highly regarded therapist, offering her golden nuggets of wisdom to stressed-out people all over America, all hankering to get some much-needed advice, some of them really quite desperate. I believe in the United Kingdom she would have been known as an agony aunt, a preferable name in my opinion, much more endearing and personalised, but somehow the name didn't catch on here in the States. Such a wizened, sagacious, astute and shrewd woman would usually be like a lovable granny, made her appearance known on radio, television shows, and of course in magazines and newspapers. I think it is safe to assume that since the advent of social media offering other easily accessible open and alternative platforms for informative advice and counselling, in more recent years the need for columnists offering their advice is still there, but not nearly as significant as it was back in its illustrious heyday in the 1980s. It certainly was a big deal back then, as people growing up in that generation will surely happily testify. I also know that tabloid readers love nothing better than learning about other people's controversial, contentious struggles. It always made them feel better about their own. Even my mother wrote into a columnist once, asking for advice over our belligerent, overbearing, fractious next-door neighbour, Mr. Ronnie Badderman, an obnoxious man who was constantly throwing bounteous amounts of dog turd over our fence, through our letterbox and God knows where else, in retaliation for a tree in our yard that he claimed was blocking out his invaluable light. It would seem that this man was deliberately going around our entire neighbourhood, selecting all the dog turd he could possibly avail himself to find, as a plethora of coiled brown offences was regularly delivered to our home. I mean, who in the world manages to collect a ceaseless supply of dog turd? Well, this man clearly did, and revelled in causing my mother no end of distress. My mother told him he was welcome to cut down the branch from his side of the fence, but would he listen? No, he seemed to believe it was her responsibility. "It's your tree," he had thundered angrily. "You need to remove the branches hanging over my fence. Why should I do it?" My mother had wilfully refused, after which he began his tireless assault on our yard, with, as I said, bounteous amounts of the most grisly-looking dog turd you've ever seen. Of course, he used his own dog's turd as well, as one of his dogs had messy stools, which my mother believed was intentional on his part. It certainly wasn't pretty. Ostensibly, people in those days would send us hundreds and hundreds of pretentious letters to the paper seeking advice. It was a completely overwhelming responsibility, so it was a shared job, done along with another girl called Kerry Gatenby. We helped answer some of these high-priority letters, of which only a select few would ever be published in the paper. We were expected to courteously reply to every single letter, offering some judicious, sapient pearls of wisdom. Many of the letters were about difficulties wrought with awkward neighbours, treacherous, feisty, obnoxious mother-in-laws, partners having affairs, family members at loggerheads with each other, children driving their parents over the edge. You know that sort of thing. The issues that can sometimes plague us, or contentious problems that one day might become a personal struggle that we're forced to address in our own lives. For the purposes of remaining exclusively anonymous, I will call the agony Aunt Linda. She was a real gregarious character who was in her 60s. Unfortunately, she did die over 28 years ago. She was a bright, cheerful, prudent woman, like a full-bodied red wine, jovial, fun-loving, flamboyant, richly knowledgeable, like a wizened owl. I remember she would dress in these bright, flamboyant, loud, in-your-face, unsubtle, colourful, flowery print dresses, always adorned with lots and lots of beaded jewellery. She was a portly, apple-shaped lady who carried most of her weight around her middle section. Her bright, cheerful, cornflower blue eyes were fabulously framed by expensive designer zooty spectacles, always in an array of cheerful colours, and often in unusual shapes and styles that were in no way retiring, for believe me, those glasses would get you noticed, as they were ocular pieces of art at their finest, while her white short curly hair was immaculately managed by her stylist. I do remember she always looked absolutely impeccable, without a stray wispy hair even daring to escape from the firm hold of her lacquer hairspray. Wherever we went, people would gravitate towards her, seeking out her shrewd, savvy advice, whether it was in the middle of the supermarket, in a restaurant, a cafe, or even on a street corner. It wasn't unusual to see a woman out of breath running towards her saying, "Are you Linda Freeman? Are you Linda Freeman, the columnist?" Linda would always nod. "That's right, I'm her." "I can't believe it's you! I can't believe it's you!" The woman would giggle, looking all flustered, growing pink in her face like a beguiled, giddy, overawed fan who put Linda on a pedestal like an illustrious celebrity of note. "Wait until my mother hears I spoke to you in person. Oh, my word, she won't believe it. This is absolutely incredible. I mean, Linda Freeman, who would think that I would even manage to bump into you like this in the middle of the street like this? I just can't believe it. She'll never believe I bumped into you, just quite by chance. My mother loves you. She contacted you once about how to deal with her friend badgering her relentlessly for loans. Your advice, it saved her life and her friendship." "I'm very pleased to have been of help," Linda would say, always enveloping the stranger in a warm, affectionate hug that always meant that people loved her all the more for her friendly, endearing nature that was much more like a lovable grandmother. I met Linda when I decided I wanted to get involved in media. It was my father who found the advertisement in the paper quite by chance, but maybe some things in life are not as random or erroneous as we might suspect. "Susan, this might be just up your street," he had said to me, circling the ad in a red pencil which read, "Advice columnist for established paper looking for assistant." I remember looking at my dad, appalled. "I want to write articles for newspapers, Dad. I don't want to be working for someone who answers people's problems. That's not my kind of thing at all." "Why ever not? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, sweetheart. That's a foolish thing to do. This is the quintessential opportunity, don't you see, for you to get onto the work floor with editors and journalists alike. In no time at all they will become friendly with you, well acquainted, on first-name terms. When they need to hire and promote a journalist for upcoming stories, who are they going to recruit? You or some stranger off the street? Even a rocket scientist would admit they're much more likely to hire you. Think about it, sweetheart. You know it makes sense. You have to work your way up from the bottom to the top. That's how it works. It's called climbing the ladder to your success. But you're the one that has to initiate that first step." My mother said, "Susan, your father is absolutely right. It is who you know in life that gives you advantages. Your father knows exactly what he's talking about." And so it was with great reluctance, a degree of trepidation, and a pair of wobbly knees, as unstable as a dodgy camping chair, that I agreed to apply for the interview, only to find I was up against hundreds of other aspiring hopeful applicants, all as eager as I was to get the job. I remember my heart sank as I viewed the competition. In truth, I felt like a scruffy stray, arriving at the National Dog Show, competing against the fastidiously manicured Afghan hounds with the long, perfect manes of seamless hair. How would I even get a look in, I wondered. I did not feel particularly confident as I entered the interview room with Linda Freeman. I remember she looked at me shrewdly through her pink glasses. I recall she asked me why I'd applied for the position. I said, "I want to make something of my life, grow from a little bud into a bright, big, blossoming rose." She looked at me with a raised brow and promptly said, "Oh, I like that analogy. I can work with that. All right, you're hired. See you in the offices Monday morning sharp." I was absolutely gobsmacked. I could hardly believe that out of the 100 applicants she had picked me. I never ever found out why. I wish I had. I'm ever grateful to my father's invaluable advice, as it worked a charm. Sure enough, I ended up with an eminent aspiring career, working with that paper for many, many years. Anyway, onwards and upwards with my bizarre story. I remember it was a Tuesday morning. It was in summer. I was wearing a cool cotton pink dress with printed white flowers on it that came above my knees. As Linda Freeman always appreciated colour, she would always complain tirelessly about people wearing drab colours and wrinkle up her nose, saying, "Oh, I do loathe beige. Anything colourless and mundane does make life so awfully dull. It's not a mistake that God made all the flowers colourful. Why? Because it uplifts us. It makes us feel good. That's why." I had arrived at the offices earlier than usual that morning. I sauntered into the kitchen to prepare myself a nice piping hot cup of coffee, while finally, with my coffee in hand, I reluctantly ambled over to the huge, overwhelming piles of letters that awaited me in the postal bag on my desk. I physically let out a huge sigh. At the daunting task that lay ahead of me, as my friend, who normally helped me with my job, was now on leave. So I hastily began opening a few with Linda Friedman's ornate ivory paper cutter. But it was one letter that was so unique, it grabbed my attention. This is exactly what it said. I still have a copy of it today. It read, "Dear Linda, I don't know where to start when writing you this letter of mine. I cannot lie, I am unduly concerned that you might think of me as delusional or as batty as a fruitcake. I want to assure you that this is certainly not the case. I am of sound mind, a woman of mature years in my early 20s. I am the devoted grandmother to two very special adoring grandchildren, one that is 6 years old, the other that is 12. I'm writing to you concerning my 12-year-old grandson Isaac, who is inordinately giving me a great cause for solicitous concern in regards to a delicate, troubling matter that has come to my attention of late. My daughter and her husband were travelling abroad to England for 3 weeks to visit a relative on her husband's side of the family. I was asked to move into the lodge to mind their 3 rambunctious, energetic large dogs, along with their 2 cats and 1 parrot, and of course to take care of the grandchildren. Naturally, I was absolutely thrilled, looking forward to this invaluable opportunity to spend some quality time with my grandkids, of whom I cherish greatly. The sprawling, very impressive ranch is situated in northern California, a fishing and hunting retreat in Plumes County, an idyllic rural spot with exquisite views, beautiful silvery lakes, surrounded by acres of resplendent national forest, consisting primarily of red firs, logpole pines, incense cedars, and Jeffrey firs, along with a scattering of hiking trails. It is the perfect, enviable environment upon which to raise children, close to the natural world, where there are lots of indigenous wild animals, from deer, the occasional bear, raccoons, skunks, bobcats, coyotes, and of course mountain lions. The moment I moved into the lodge, I kept noticing my grandson, 12-year-old Isaac, would disappear into the woods, vanishing from my sight, failing to adhere to my rules that were like water off a duck's back as far as he was concerned, possibly because his mother has never disciplined him before. She's very bad like that. Naturally, I insisted that he stayed in close proximity to the lodge, as I like to keep a beady eye on him at all times, as of course I was responsible for his charge. I took that role very seriously. He assured me that his parents let him do pretty much anything he wanted to do on their extensive property. "But Granny," he would protest, "Mummy lets me play wherever I want." Of course, that doesn't surprise me at all, as his mother is a free-spirit hippie type who's never taken responsibility for anything seriously a day in her life. You must understand that under no circumstances do I wish to deride or denigrate my own daughter, for that would be a terrible thing to do. But I have to say she is easygoing, laid back, very relaxed, much like a golden retriever, but probably not as astute, quick-witted, sharp or perceptive. I would say she is exceptionally naive, impressionable and callow, like a babe in the woods, I'm afraid, as far as her own children are concerned. I confess I'm probably an overprotective, punctilious grandmother, but I knew instinctively that little Isaac was hiding something from me, so I decided to investigate what he was getting up to behind my back. Suffice to say I was more than a little curious, as whatever it was that appeared to be keeping him very entertained was doing so famously for several hours during the day. Now I know from personal experience that little boys can easily become bored, but this was never Isaac's problem at all. On the contrary, he would return home, buzzing happily like a bee over a can of cola, looking like a perfectly contented boy that had been having a very good time, and being on his own, isolated like this, and so content, I did find my antennae were wagging more than just a little, shall we say. I sensed something was up. Nothing was to prepare me for what I was to uncover. One day when he rode his bicycle into the heart of the woods, I was close behind him on my daughter's mountain bike. Luckily he didn't observe me. I can be very discreet when needs must. I watched Isaac as he climbed eagerly off his bike, balancing it somewhat precariously against a tree. He began calling the name Oot, 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 or something like that, of which I cannot pronounce eloquently, I'm afraid. I'd like to mention that this forest is exquisitely beautiful. I could quite understand why he'd want to hang out there all day. Even I was completely beguiled by its magnificence. The trees are very tall, with long slender trunks clustered together quite tightly, but it is strewn with long trails and pretty ground covers. I decided to hide behind one of those trees. I remember thinking, who the heck is he calling? Then gliding through the trees was this 4-foot creature, but it looked human, only there were aspects to it that reminded me of a primate, most notably the bullet-shaped head, the very long arms, and of course the hair-covered body. Otherwise it was like a young boy covered in hair. Naturally, I was unduly alarmed that my grandson was playing with this strange human-like creature, but it seemed that they had a very good, solid friendship. But it was when I saw the parents that I became incredibly alarmed. The mother and father of this strange hairy boy came to sit down on the earthen floor together, or should I say they squatted on their haunches to watch their child play with my grandson. The parents of the hair-covered boy were monstrously huge in size, scaring the living daylights out of me. I stood behind the tree, trembling, shaking like a blancmange jelly, with panic filling my chest with a rising level of angst. I can do no justice in my descriptions to describe these anomalous creatures to you. In truth, I never envisaged such outlandish, peculiar creatures could exist here in North America. Surely I would have heard of such things before. How can something this big hide in plain sight in our forests without ever being observed? It boggles the mind. Well, it most certainly does mine. But let me assure you unequivocally that these things are indeed real. The parents were easily over 7 foot tall, without any exaggeration on my part. Easily about 3 foot wide, possibly even more. They were all covered in a similar dark brown colour hair, much like that of a black bear, only the hair was much more human-like in texture, and there were bald patches under the arms and on the knees. I discerned that their heads were bullet-shaped, like their sons', with human-looking dark faces, flat noses, deep-set dark eyes, high cheekbones, sloped foreheads that were heavily furrowed. There are no words that I can use to emphasize the substantial size of their colossal bodies that were burly, muscular and powerful, built like a truck. Their vast size was indeed an issue that troubled me most, as I am desperately concerned that they may not know their own strength or power. I am reminded of picking up a tiny insect in order to rescue and save it, like a ladybug, for example, and unintentionally squeezing it between my fingers because it's so tiny. If this creature gave my grandson a friendly thump on the back, it could potentially knock him unconscious. I know it sounds dramatic, but it is a big worry for me that will not abate. It has caused me a great deal of distress of late. Yet I have to tell you, my grandson was playing close by to them, totally oblivious about how formidable, daunting and imposing these powerful creatures are. In truth, they were benign and benevolent towards him. I'd go so far as to say they were sweet, even-tempered, actually quite endearing in a funny sort of way, but like two proud parents arriving at a football stadium to watch their kids playing a sports game. Their son and my grandson were playing together so happily. It certainly was a pleasure to watch. They were playing with Coca-Cola labelled yo-yos, but the hairy boy made my grandson look like a novice. He played with that yo-yo with a coordination that I've never ever seen before. For a moment I forgot my fear. I marvelled at this creature's dexterity, how he was able to force the gravity to spin the string up and down in his hand without even losing that quintessential flow. He was performing stunts with that yo-yo that I've yet to see, without tripping once or losing the memento with the string, so to speak. Before long the parents were shown the yo-yo by my grandson. They studied it together curiously, with their deep-set dark brown eyes filling with excitement and expressions of wondrous awe, like two enthusiastic kids. Of course, their own kid demonstrated to them how to use the yo-yo. At first, the parents got it wrong for the first couple of attempts, but they soon caught on quickly, and in no time at all, they were playing the yo-yo even better than their own son. My grandson was saying to them, "You can play the yo-yo better than anyone I know in the whole world." I think they understood what he was saying, as they seemed heartily pleased with the compliment. The creatures were talking together excitedly, like frenzied bees, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. Their language sounded like one of those long-forgotten Indian languages from the Navajo Nation. I could be wrong, but that was my impression. When my grandson came from the woods, I confronted him. I told him I'd seen his friends. I told him I was worried about him playing games with such dangerous-looking creatures, even though they did seem so benign. He laughed at me and said, "Granny, they're not dangerous. They're my best friends. They love me. I don't even know any humans as nice as them. They would never, ever hurt me." I said to him, "But they're very big, Isaac. Imagine if they did hurt you." He said to me, "Granny, just because they're big, it doesn't mean that they would hurt me. A big dog doesn't hurt the little dog in a household, does it? I'm family to them. They will never ever hurt me. They're protective of me." Of course, that told me off, put me firmly in my place. I know if I refuse to let my grandson play with his hairy friends, then I can almost certainly welcome tantrums, discord and chaos in this home of mine. Well, in this home of their parents, which of course is the last thing I want to do. Also, if I was to contact my hillbilly daughter, who is so vague, so incredibly caught up in a dream world of her own making, that I was worried about Isaac's welfare playing with those creatures, she'd never take me seriously for a month in Sundays. She'd tell me to stop being a stick in the mud and to let Isaac play with his hairy friends. She will definitely see things very differently to me, and that is a grievous worry. The reason I'm writing to you, Linda, is I'm wondering if I need to worry about the welfare of my grandson interacting with these wild-looking people. Is he in danger? Should I be concerned? I would appreciate your sound advice. Yours faithfully, Lydia Anderson. As you can imagine, I was completely stunned, perturbed and bewildered by this incredulous, extraordinary letter, pondering what kind of creature it was that this little boy called Isaac in Northern California was interacting with in the woods. I handed over the letter to Linda, who claimed she knew of an indigenous Indian who might have the answers to Lydia's concerned questions. This was her letter that she wrote back to the fretful, very bothered grandmother. "Dear Lydia, thank you for taking the time and energy to write me a letter that left me with more questions than answers, for I am no expert in the matter of human relationships with unusual, anomalous creatures such as you describe. However, if they are so human in appearance, there is a distinct possibility that they could be a lot like us, sharing many of our human-like characteristics. I took the initiative to contact an old Indian friend of mine on your behalf to see if he could give me some insight to your extraordinary dilemma, as I have indeed heard of such outlandish creatures existing in North America before, bearing a startling resemblance to a human but only covered with hair. I was amazed to learn that my Indian friend has had very positive interactions with the creatures that you describe, that many refer to as the guardians of the forest, a race of giant human-like beings covered in hair, often known by the name of Sasquatch. While it is true that there are stories that describe these mountain giants as dangerous, they are normally benign and non-aggressive by nature, although there are exceptions to that intrinsic rule, as they are as individual as a human being, where some are good, others duplicitous, not too different to us, although most of the good ones prefer not to interact with humans at all. It's the ones that are a little obnoxious by character that might be looking to pick a fight. In my experience of counselling with human beings over the years, I have met people intrinsically evil that you could never ever trust. I have met people who are kind to the very core that you could trust with your entire life. In my personal opinion, although I'm no expert in this matter, from your descriptions of how the creatures interacted with your grandchild, it would seem to me that they are kindly by nature. The Bible passage comes into mind. By their fruit you will know them. If the creatures were a potential threat or liability to your grandson, he would have been in trouble long time ago. With these creatures, their behaviour would have revealed their hearts. A violent, aggressive creature would possibly have an evil heart. A kindly creature, a very good one. It seems to me, Lydia, that your impressions of your grandchild Isaac playing with a yo-yo with these creatures, that even you experienced a great measure of joy watching them interact together, which in itself is revelatory. It tells me a lot, for you would never ever derive pleasure from something you perceive to be an underlying threat, or of course an invisible landmine that's waiting to go off. I believe your higher self or intuition sensed that the creatures were actually harmless. Their human-like similarities lead me to believe that they can relate to us in many remarkable regards, and have more in common with us than we may actually realise. As for your desperate concerns about the creature accidentally harming your grandson with a thump on the back, I think those are unfounded. As humans, we are very careful when picking up a delicate animal like a kitten or a small puppy. We're mindfully aware of their fragility. These creatures, I'm in no doubt, understand that by contrast to them, we're exceedingly fragile. They're intelligent, I'm sure they perceive this fact, and are naturally gentle towards your grandson Isaac, based on the fact that they care for his well-being. It is my Indian friend's emphatic belief, based from his years of experience with these Sasquatch creatures, that you have nothing to concern yourself with, given that they have befriended your grandson personally. If they have welcomed him into their lives, he is possibly the safest person in your entire household, as they would defend your grandson to the death, if needs must. Such is the extent of their loyalty to those they invite into their immediate circle. He assured me that he has personally befriended a Sasquatch himself in what remains to be a solid, enduring friendship to this very day. He believes that they have accepted Isaac as one of their own. However, if I were in your shoes, I would speak to the parents about his unlikely friendship with these creatures, even if your daughter is as vague as you say when they return from their holiday abroad. It is important that they're not uninformed about what their son is doing when he plays in the forest. They must be aware of your son's attachment to his hairy friends, for their son is impressionable. Any foolish move on their part, the son will be unlikely to ever forget, which of course could potentially harm that very essential parental bond. So tread cautiously with wisdom, as children have very long memories. My Indian friend is prepared to visit your home to give you any further advice. I hope that my letter has been of much help and comfort for you in your current dilemma. Yours faithfully, Linda Freeman. I do know that the Indian friend of Linda's did visit the family and was able to assure them that the Sasquatch in the wood were in fact benign, benevolent and harmless. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. The year was 1982. The time was 10:10 on a Tuesday morning, in early spring. I drove my bright pink Ford Mustang down the long ribbon of asphalt in a pretty green, leafy up-and-coming neighbourhood, not far from Denver in Colorado. The sprawling individual properties were quite wide apart on either side of the road, while the picturesque pavements were lined with statuesque red oak trees in the throes of early maturity. Some of the properties big enough for stabling a few horses. I loved the area, as although close to town, it had that rural, rustic, convivial feeling about it, and was heavily wooded, boasting a plethora of fabulous hiking and horse-riding trails. It wasn't uncommon to see horses trotting down the road, a sight which was always so pleasing to me, as it makes me think of summer picnics, icy cold glasses of homemade lemonade, and days on the sun lounger, soaking in the early morning sunshine like a salamander. At this poignant time in my life, I was living in a tacky apartment in the cosy, quaint little antique town of Cripple Creek, near Denver, with the county seat of Teller County, which was known for its gold, with over 500 mines that churned over 22 million ounces of gold in 2 decades.
Quite astonishing, really. In truth, to be blatantly honest with you, my apartment was more like a glorified run-down bedsit, with a tiny kitchenette attached and a bathroom, all with ancient prehistoric fittings and fixtures going back to the Ark. Indeed, some of the electric connections were incredibly dodgy, so much so that I was scared I might electrocute myself when using the iron. I had rented this inauspicious, uncongenial place from a very, very disagreeable, hard-hearted landlord, Mr. Nigel Furrow, who had taken to despising me all the more after learning about my altercation with local girl and diner owner Kirsten Tanner. You see, all the townsfolk loved Kirsten Tanner, as if she was a mother, daughter or friend to them that they were personally acquainted with. If you hurt Kirsten Tanner, then you were a social outcast, a pariah, a persona non grata if you like, someone that they didn't want to know at all. I could feel the hostile energy towards me in town bubbling over like jam in a cauldron on the hob. Personally, it was directed towards me like a feisty windstorm that wasn't going to recede any time soon. All this over a grievous misunderstanding, but certainly when mud sticks, it sticks hard. It's very difficult to remove. It was clear no one wanted me in town. They even said as much. Mr. Furrow was flinging me out of my apartment in a week's time. After that I had nowhere to go, no money either. I'd lost my job as a waitress at a popular diner, where I'd made the very foolish off-the-cuff decision to date a very pleasant-looking stranger, a cowboy type with a fun sense of humour, an attractive southern drawl. I remember he'd strolled into the diner very casually, with an air of indifference, looking like Clint Eastwood in his heyday on a country and western screen set. He had that kind of confident, self-assured swagger. I had been waitressing his table, and noticed my boss, Kirsten Tanner, giving the stranger dagger-like looks that could so easily kill. I had observed her bright blue eyes looking furious as she shook her wispy mane of long blonde hair indignantly, while continuing to cast pestiferous fleeting looks at the stranger. Under her breath I heard her say, "What a bloody cheek! What a bloody cheek! The nerve of the man! I've seen everything now. Typical of him to show up here." I noticed the stranger looking purposely in our direction. He lifted his cowboy hat at Kirsten, gave her a huge cheeky wink, which seemed to ruffle up her feathers, causing her body to jiggle indignantly. I should have guessed that there was history between them. Why I did not, I cannot fathom. I was thinking that Kirsten thought the stranger was full of himself, arrogant, opinionated, assertive. She always hated men like that. I mean, no one looks at a stranger with such a pronounced venom like a black mamba that wants to strike out and bite them, if they don't have an axe to grind with that person. But let's just say, not to put too fine a point on it, the naive, pathetically whimsical little me did not even bat an eyelid, but walked straight into the lion's den, offering myself on a platter to the man as a tasty hors d'oeuvre. Well, not quite. You see, I was to discover that this stranger in town was in fact my boss's ex-husband, Dustin Tanner. Theirs had been a stormy, tempestuous marriage, littered with contentious issues over trust and fidelity, along with a good measure of jealousy thrown into the works, the quintessential ideal ingredients to facilitate the explosive fights and arguments that eventually transpired, that caused the relationship to crumble like pieces of dry wall in your hands, or keel over like a pack of cards. Yet despite everything, it would seem that a burning, hungry passion was smouldering between the divorced couple, as if the flames had been rekindled, while the exaggerated mock and intense hatred they projected towards each other barely even successfully masked the underlying deep love the couple still held for each other, that like a fire had never been extinguished. Ostensibly there were red glowing embers begging for that fire to be ignited again, which everyone in town would love to have seen happen. Well, most people, that is. Everyone seemed to know this invaluable, benignant information, except me, of course. I'd never actually met Dustin Tanner before. I was oblivious to who he was, nor did I know that Kirsten Tanner was actually a divorcee. Little did I know that Kirsten's ex-husband was using me as a pawn to make his ex-wife jealous. It had worked a charm. An innocent drink with a perfect stranger had put a spanner in the works, stoked up the delinquent, incorrigible flames that were now out of control, as if a dragon had been breathing on that fire, stoking it up all the more, while those divorce papers between them actually seemed to be lifting off and flying away in the wind. I mean, talk about bad luck. I wasn't even interested in the man, for goodness sake, despite his debonair good looks, beguiling wit, and ever so nice manners. In truth, he wasn't my type. Besides, I was done with relationships after having dated the biggest jerk on the entire planet that I discovered was having an affair with another man. So that was a low kick to the guts, one that I was still recovering from. Regretfully, like the biggest bundling idiot that I actually am, with the astute perception of a wayward gnat, I had agreed to have a little drink with him at a bar in town, which was a catastrophic mistake on my part, as I'd been spotted by the town's nosy ferrets, and then some, which had been the whole idea. It would seem that tongues began to wag, as they always do in a small town. Whispers abounded, as people sniggered and giggled, pointing accusatory fingers at me. "You've got a brass nerve," someone said to me in the bar. "And in broad daylight too. You should be ashamed of yourself, little hussy. Kirsten is going to love you for this." Naturally, I had no way of knowing what on earth was going on, and why people were giving me such fierce, hostile and unkind looks. When I arrived at work the following day for my lunch shift, Kirsty was standing there, looking like a belligerent bull terrier. I could swear that I saw smoke emanating from her nostrils. She was incandescent with rage. She had her hands on her narrow hips and was glaring at me. "Had a nice evening last night, did we, Tamara?" she said, rolling my name on her tongue in a derogatory way. "Enjoyed your drink with Dustin, did you?" "I hope you did, because it's the most expensive drink you've ever had, girl." I stammered, looking at Kirsten awkwardly. What was she going on about? Why was she so enraged? "Sorry, Kirsten, but what you talking about?" "Don't lie to me, Tamara. I hate liars. You know. Everybody else knows. Don't play little Miss Ignorant Butter Won't Melt in My Mouth look with me, will you? It ain't going to wash with me. I wasn't born yesterday." "No what?" I asked. "That the man you had a drink with last night was Kirsten's ex-husband, Dustin, and they're still madly in love with each other," said Stacey, one of the other waitresses, bursting into the conversation. "Although, of course, they'll never admit it's true. I'm sorry, Tamara, but Kirsten's ex asked you out for a drink just to upset her. The oldest trick in the book, if you ask me." "Who said anything about my being in love with the man? Stacey, for goodness sake, we're divorced." "Methinks the lady protests too much," said Stacey, giving me a wink and bustling off to attend to her duties. I gawked. "I had no idea you were an item. It was only a drink, Kirsten. I'm not interested in Dustin in that way. And nothing happened. It was a perfectly innocent drink, I assure you." "I'm not going to sit here and listen to all this. All of it is lies." Kirsten growled at me. She lifted up the huge glass container of peppermints on the reception desk on the diner next to the till and threw it at me. It crashed on the linoleum floor, breaking up into hundreds of glass shards, while the peppermints went rolling and dancing all over the diner, underneath tables and in obscure places. "Clean this mess up," said Kirsten. "Every last shard of glass, every single peppermint. And then I want you out of here, out of my life, out of my diner. No one, I repeat, no one messes with my man, even if he is my ex. Do you understand?" There was no reasoning with Kirsty. She was convinced I'd known the stranger was her ex-husband, and my accepting a date from him had gone down like a lead balloon. I'm almost sure it revived the green-eyed monster from its slumber, as Kirsten's defiant, maddened look revealed that she was still in love with the man, and my intruding on that sacred space was filling her with a fury that would make an elephant in musk look like a teddy bear. The woman was literally foaming at the mouth. The vindictive look she gave me, well, let's not talk about that look. It still gives me the heebie-jeebies to this very day. It would seem that everybody in town had taken Kirsten's side, seen me as a wannabe who was trying to seduce her ex-husband. It was nasty being labelled like that, grossly unfair, utterly ridiculous, but my protestations became like a faint humming noise in the background, as no one was listening, nor did they even bother to listen, or even want to for that matter. As in a small town, when people have fixed ideas about something, they usually stick harder than chewing gum under a school kid's desk. "You should be ashamed of yourself," Miss Berglass had said to me. She was one of the elderly town residents. "I thought you were a nice girl, Tamara, but now I can see you for what you really are, a prize little slut. Fancy making a move on Tamara's ex like that, and rubbing her nose in it to boot. Have you no shame? The younger generation these days," she tutted under her breath, "they've got no idea about a damn thing." For a start, Mrs. Berglass, I protested, I'll have you know that I had no idea that Kirsten's ex was playing her to make her jealous. I didn't know who he was until this morning. Besides, they're divorced. That's insignificant, piped Mrs. Berglass. What's a piece of paper? Meaningless. Those two love the bones off each other. But you were determined to ruin it all. You little hussy. She shook her head belligerently, her sizable girth wobbling in indignation. Frankly, Tamara, I'm absolutely appalled. I'm very, very ashamed of you. All I had left in the world was my pink Ford Mustang, which I didn't want to sell. I needed a job desperately. One was hard to come by, especially as any jobs going were not being handed over to me out of loyalty to Kirsten Tanner. So when I was in town at the baker's, I overheard a young lady talking about an au pair job that she was going to apply for. I've got the interview in half an hour. It's outside Denver, so I'll be leaving shortly. Wish me luck. They're interviewing a few other people. I really want this job. It's board and lodgings and looking after an 8-month-old baby girl. The perfect job for me, she gloated. I've got a feeling I'm going to get this one. But the only thing is they are interviewing other people this morning. So let's just keep the fingers crossed, shall we? Good luck, Marion, said the baker. I'm sure they'll give you the job. You're absolutely brilliant with babies. Here's hoping, she said. It was then that I had this bold, bright, irrational idea that came bursting into my mind. A moment of inspiration, if you like. It was on a whim I surreptitiously followed the young lady to her appointment. I know that may have been presumptuous of me, but I didn't care. When you're as desperate as I was for a job, my etiquette and social graces, I'm afraid, went flying out of the window faster than a kite. I was determined to apply for this job. I mean, what did I have to lose? It was everything I could ask for. Board and lodgings, a good salary, and of course looking after a baby girl. And I loved babies. I boldly followed the woman's truck down the drive from our small town to an attractive countrified neighbourhood and parked next to this young girl's truck rather audaciously. But there was no point in pursuing things with a timid approach, I thought. The woman called Marion glanced at me briefly through her truck window. For a moment our eyes met. She hurriedly looked away. I could almost hear her audibly sigh. She rightly assumed I was another applicant for the job, which of course I was now. She was realizing the competition had got infinitely greater, which meant her aspiring job, like a hot air balloon, would just sail away into the clouds, disappearing into the ether. Well, I hoped she was thinking that, but she did have a cocky look about her. She climbed out of her truck, slamming the car door behind her, giving me another furtive glance. She was holding in her hand a file, which I imagined was a highly exaggerated glossary of all the babies she had cared for in the past. I could almost see the reviews in my mind's eye. Marion worked for me for 2 years. She was wonderful. Can't do without her, sort of thing. I wanted to throw up and be violently sick. I perceived she had all those incredible glowing references from previous au pair jobs, while I had absolutely nothing. She looked like the kind of girl the couple might hire on the spot, without even stopping to draw breath. She was a small woman with a brown pigtail and deep-set brown eyes, wearing a pretty conservative modest frock, looking every bit the picture of efficiency, domestic bliss and no-nonsense rolled into one, as she strode up the steps with a mock confidence towards the gleaming white front door, framed by the canopy of the porch. I watched her obscured silhouette as she banged the locker. Moments later the door was open. She was bustled into the house. "Please don't give her the job," I was muttering to myself. Please don't let her get the job. Please. I need it much more than she does." The house was a typical craftsman-style home, painted in a soft peach colour, with dark grey triangular roofs, overhanging eaves with exposed rafters and beams, heavily tapered columns, all painted in white, with patterned windowed panes and a covered porch. It was a very attractive home, situated on a sprawling park-like property, with perfectly manicured emerald green lawns, colourful flower beds bursting with bright cheerful colours, and scatterings of trees, some that had burst into fragrant pink blossoms, as well as a gleaming silvery pond that twinkled under the shafts of sunlight that bounced off its rippling surface in pretty rainbow-like prisms. To the rear of the property was a flowering meadow that was fringed by a wood grove comprised of the viridescent spruce and logpole pine trees. Finally Marion left the house. I could see the confident smile on her face. She looked pretty assured that the job was almost a done deal. I would know that look anywhere, self-satisfied, assured and smug. I watched her get into her truck and drive away. It certainly undermined my confidence. I sighed. already seeing that opportunity of acquiring this job dwindling away before me, like a bird on the wind. Still, I'd got here, hadn't I? And so I would do my damnedest to get this job. I crossed my fingers and toes, said a tiny little prayer, which ended and began with, "Please God." I wasted no time in climbing out of my pink Ford Mustang, slamming the door gently behind me, straightening out my sweater with the inappropriate logo written across it, in gold print, which read, "You better believe I'm cool." Not exactly the kind of clothing you should wear for an interview like this. Still, beggars can't be choosers. I made the lonely trip to the front door with only my purse in my hands, while wearing a pair of blue jeans and a pair of neat-looking sneakers. I knocked at the door and was whisked into the living room. "Sorry, you are?" said a distinguished-looking man wearing a leather jacket, turtleneck top and dark jeans, whom I imagined was the husband. I was right. His name was Martin. "I'm Tamara Holden," I said. The woman looked up at me, glancing at the paper briefly. "The agency never mentioned a Tamara Holden," she said, beckoning for me to take a seat, on what I can only describe as the most luxurious couch that I'd ever seen. I sat on its edge awkwardly, not daring to get too comfortable or even familiar, my toes tapping the wooden floor beneath me, my fingers trembling. What the heck am I doing here, I thought. She's never, ever going to hire me in a month of Sundays. I tried desperately to smile, but it was a fixed, painted-on smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, what a beautiful home you have here," I said, glancing around the room nervously. "The furnishings, they're so classic, but stylish. I love the contemporary artwork on your wall, along with the bright scatter cushions. Oh, and those glorious rugs of yours. You've coordinated everything so well. I love the bright touches of colour. They bring the room to life." "Well, I try," said the woman, failing to hide the pleased smile on her face. I noticed she had beautiful Titian colouring, blue eyes and a fair porcelain skin. She was a very attractive woman, who had the kind of aristocratic look you would expect to see in the pre-war years in the likes of movies like Downton Abbey. She had that lady of the mansion look, a younger version of Maggie Smith in her prime. She was wearing white cotton pants and a blue and white striped top that were clearly designer. "So tell me about yourself, Tamara. What kind of experience have you had with children? More to the point, infants that require diaper changes, introduction to solids, breast milk feedings." "Look," I said awkwardly, I will be straight with you. I've never worked as a professional au pair before, but I do have a great deal of experience with babies and children." "You've never been an au pair?" said the woman, looking at me with a transfixed expression of baffled astonishment that revealed itself clearly in her pale blue eyes. "How can I possibly hire you without any references? That would be very insane. Why on earth would the agency send someone like you to my abode? It's nonsensical. I need someone with lots of experience. I did make that very clear to them." "Well, that's so easily redeemed," I assured her. "Please give my Aunt Judy a call, please. I've looked after her kids from whence they were babies. I've changed their diapers, introduced the babies to solids, played with them, read them books, taught them artwork. She'll tell you I'm a natural with kids." At that the woman sighed, eyeing me warily through her blue eyes, as if trying to get the measure of me. She promptly picked up the receiver and began to dial my aunt. "I don't know why I'm doing this," she muttered. "It goes against protocol." Yes, that's right. My name is Hannah Walterskew. I'm presently interviewing your niece, a young woman called Tamara." "Yes, that's right. She's with me now. She's applying for this job as an au pair with me, a paid au pair. I understand that she's looked after your children in recent years. Could you tell me how good she was with them, especially when they were wearing diapers and being introduced to solids, because that's very important for me?" It seemed like my aunt was talking at the other end of the line for quite a substantial period of time. "So you think I can trust her completely?" "You do. Okay, thank you very much." "Thank you for your help. You've been so informative." She said that, putting down the phone. "Well," said Mrs. Walterskew, looking up at me, "that was positively the most glowing reference I've ever heard. Your aunt didn't hold back on her effusive praise of you. What was it she said? 'In all my born days, I've never met anyone so good with kids as Tamara is. You'll never find anyone to equal her. If you don't hire her on the spot, you'll regret it.' It seems your aunt thinks you're a natural with children. Maybe I should give you a chance, but it's only because all the au pairs that I've had of late have really let me down. The last one in particular, dreadful girl, she just bogged off. I can't have someone with neurotic energy looking after my daughter. It could rub off negatively on my girl. Previously, I've employed young ladies that are much more formal than you. Perhaps that's where I've been going so terribly wrong. Maybe a more relaxed approach will suit Amelia better. Look, I'll give you a 2-week trial. If I'm happy with your performance, you can have the job. I'm out during the day with my husband. I'm an interior designer. My husband's an architect. We work together as a team. We have offices not too far from here. I'm a phone call away in an emergency. Now, we do have a cleaning team who come here twice a week to give the house the once-over. You'll be staying in the bedroom adjacent to the baby's nursery. I'll set up a baby monitor in there for you. And so it was I moved into the Walterskew home and began to look after little Amelia, who was an 8-month-year-old babbling baby that was clapping all the time so happily, making cute sounds, already crawling. She was absolutely adorable, with the brightest, most gorgeous blue eyes that I've ever seen, and the chubbiest cheeks. I could not imagine why a mother would not want to enjoy this short magical time with their baby, as it's over so very quickly. It was clear that Hannah Walterskew was a busy woman, driven by her business. That came first. I felt as if I'd landed on my feet in this beautiful, sumptuous home, where no expense had been spared. But the house had been designed for comfort in mind, with sweeping oak floors, contemporary rugs, exquisite artworks on the walls, and fabulously stylish furnishings. During the days I looked after little Amelia, I always erected a play pen designed for 8-month-year-old kids under the shade of the large oak tree in the backyard, where little Amelia could crawl around to her heart's content and play with some of her square blocks and other toys. I knew she was safe there. While the annoying hunger signals in my brain were firing on all cylinders, I couldn't refuse them. I could watch Amelia from the kitchen through the glass sliding windows that overlooked the old oak tree. In that short space of time, she would be absolutely fine. I picked up Amelia in my arms, gave her a quick cuddle. She chuckled and clapped her hands. I then placed her back into the pen. "I'll be back in a second," I told her, scurrying quickly to the kitchen, where I busied myself preparing a sandwich. I layered slices of cheese and ham on pieces of whole wheat bread with slices of beef tomato and curls of lettuce. As I was doing this, I glanced out of the window to see how Amelia was doing. The knife I'd been buttering fell out of my hands, crashing onto the cork floor, as I stared at Amelia's playpen, as if I was seeing a ghost. For standing over the pen, bending down on its haunches, was the most peculiar creature I've ever seen in my entire life. Amelia was gurgling, laughing at this thing, pulling at its hair. You would have thought my first reaction was to run and scream at the top of my lungs, but I was frozen to the spot, paralysed by a stupefied shock. The creature, clearly female, as I could see a couple of breasts jutting through the layers of long flowing dark hair that covered her dense, powerful torso. The creature unhesitantly picked up Amelia, lifting her up in the air, easily 7 feet off the ground, her delighted eyes focusing on Amelia's response. She was bobbing her above in her arms as if she was flying the little girl, and judging by Amelia's expression, she was loving the fuss, and of course the strange flying game that she was engaged in. What on earth was this thing, I wondered? It was covered in hair with a human-looking face and a pyramid-shaped head, low slung upon its shoulders. I could tell it was a monstrously huge creature based on its large girth and burly proportions. I mean, it was built like a truck, very solid, hefty, substantial. All of a sudden, the female creature appeared to be sniffing the air, wrinkling up her nose in disgust and distaste, as if to locate the source of a very foul, unpleasant stench. The creature lifted Amelia's nappy close to her nose and recoiled in disgust. She now knew where the smell was coming from. Amelia probably needed her nappy changing. To my horror, the creature bounced to her feet, running off with Amelia in her arms, and they glided away together towards the wood grove, aligned with blue spruces, Engelmanns, and logpole pines. What the heck? I thought. I had to be in the middle of a nightmare from which I would surely wake. All of a sudden I heard the most god-awful scream, and I realised that I was the one that was making the noise. Suddenly it was as if my frozen state had dissipated. I finally came to my senses as I began to bound through the sliding doors, down the patio steps, towards the old oak tree. All I could hear myself was saying, "Oh, no, please, no, God, no!" I glanced at the playpen. Sure enough, Amelia was nowhere to be seen. "Oh, no, oh, my word, no, please, no!" She was gone from my sight. I knew I hadn't imagined what I'd seen. My senses filled with unadulterated horror as I realised the 8-month-old was well and truly gone. I can't describe to you those moments of realizing that a baby put in your charge is now missing, abducted by the most peculiar creature I'd ever seen. I couldn't imagine what I would tell the parents, the looks I would get when I blamed her abduction on a huge, hairy humanoid creature with ape-like influences to its appearance. For a start, no one would believe a word of it. I'd look like I'd lost my marbles, that I should be booking into the nearest psychological unit for mental evaluations. I could even see Hannah shaking her head in disgust and saying I should have never let that woman into our home and trusted her aunt's biased recommendations. Anyone can see she's as nutty as a fruitcake. All these horrifying scenarios were building up in my head like a pressure cooker that was about to explode in any given minute. So I charged through the woods like a bull in a china shop as I aimlessly called the little girl's name. Amelia! 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 The tears were pouring down my face. In a trice, helplessness consumed me, while a deep gut-wrenching nausea as bitter as gall rose up in the back of my throat. Truly, if I had had time to spare, of which I had none, I would have gone directly to the bushes and hurled up the contents of my stomach, as my biliousness was unceasing, hammering away at my guts like the rough ocean waves hitting a rock, pounding him over and over again without reprieve. Apart from anything else, I loved the little girl, almost as if she was my own. Her cute little face, the gurgles she made, her animated expression when she pointed at things, the way she laughed and chuckled, especially when I fed her with a spoon and asked her to open her mouth for the chuk-chuk train, which she always found highly amusing and very entertaining. She would laugh as she opened her mouth out wide, accepting the spoon of pureed pear that I parked into her mouth. She would oscillate her arms and point to the spoon, and once again the chuk-chuk train would start up all over again to deliver some more pear puree into her mouth. At this precious time in her life, she was beginning to make audible sounds. Before long she would be saying words like mama, dada. But now she was gone, vanished completely from her playpen like a willowing wisp of smoke. I knew what I had to do. I needed to call her parents at once, call the sheriff, as I was alone on the property. I was never going to find her on my own, but what the heck was I going to say about her abductor? Would anyone believe a word of it? In their shoes, I certainly wouldn't. I ran past the playpen, up the steps of the patio, through the sliding doors towards the phone, and I began to dial Hannah's number. "Hannah speaking. How can I help you?" came the familiar business-like voice. "Hannah," I cried down the receiver while still glancing out of the glass sliding windows to view the desolate scene before me, my fingers trembling, my voice unstable, too unstable to disguise its unsteady wobbliness. A whole lump the size of a golf ball was trapped in the back of my throat. Then I suddenly saw a hazy, dense, vertical tower of black snaking through the trees, getting larger and larger and larger as it neared its graceful approach, until it became much more defined, sharper in focus, and that was when I saw the large humanoid creature returning with Amelia in her arms. She was bobbing the child affectionately on her hips, rocking her up and down, her eyes filled with an incredible devoted love. Finally, her overlong arms replaced her in the playpen, while Amelia began to cry in protest when the creature left her, as she clearly didn't want the anomalous creature to go. She was not usually that responsive to strangers. She wobbled on her chubby legs as she tried to haul herself to her feet so that she was balancing over the bright pink walls of her playpen, while her tiny little hands were waving. The creature gave her one more doting look and promptly glided away into the woods, moving with an astonishing grace, with her arms swinging backwards and forwards in a marching motion. Tamara, is that you? Tamara, is that you? Is something wrong? Is everything all right with Amelia?" Yes, it's me," I said, trying to compose myself, drawing in a huge relieved breath. "It's me." "Look, Tamara, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm very busy. I told you not to phone me unless it was important. What is going on? Is everything all right?" I think Amelia said mummy," I said, lying quickly through my teeth, thinking fast on my feet, for the ideal, perfect excuse to excuse my random telephone call. "Really?" said Hannah's voice softening at the other end of the phone. "She said mummy. Amelia said mummy. Oh, my word," came a gasp and an animated voice. "Oh, Amelia said mummy." "I think so," I said. Hannah sounded elated. "Did you hear that, sweetheart?" I could hear her say to her husband, "Amelia said mummy. Her first words, mummy. Now that's a milestone. Please note, sweetheart, she didn't say daddy first." "I heard," said the voice of her husband, that sounded less than amused. "Our daughter said mama and not dada, and dada's so much easier to say." Don't rub it in, sweetheart. I'm sorry to have phoned, Hannah. I apologise profusely. I just thought you should know. Oh, I appreciate you phoning, Tamara. This is a very big deal. I think it was very important you phoned. I don't think the other au pairs I hired would have been on the ball like you are. You're doing a sterling job, Tamara. Well done. I'm incredibly impressed with you, young lady. And Amelia loves you to boot. I put down the receiver, dashing out of the sliding doors, down the patio steps towards the playpen. Amelia was busying herself with some play bricks, piling them on top of each other. I lifted dear, sweet, darling Amelia up into my arms to embrace her with a huge, affectionate cuddle, while bountiful tears of relief flowed down my cheeks like the raindrops on a glass pane. And that was when I discovered she wasn't wearing her nappy. It had been discarded, but in its place I noticed that instead of a nappy, a pasting of overlapping leaves had been applied to her bum, but with such a masterful precision. It was a thick padding of leaves, tied together with twine, that had been placed over the baby's derriere, almost a direct imitation of the nappy that she'd previously been wearing. I was stunned, impressed, amazed, baffled to see that whatever this creature was, it had not only discarded the old dirty diaper, but cleaned little Amelia up, possibly at the stream, and applied vine leaves to her bum. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, but thank God Amelia was back safe and well, and in the end that was all that actually mattered. I knew then that whatever this hairy humanoid was, it clearly had no intention of harming the little girl, but I still didn't want to take any chances, so I knew from now on I needed to watch over the little mite with extra vigilance. I knew better than to tell Hannah and her husband about what had happened to their little daughter that day, for I wisely discerned that I would most certainly have been given my marching orders. I needed this job. Besides, I loved looking after little Amelia. One day I received a surprise visit from my boss at the diner, whom I hadn't seen for a considerable long period of time. I got the shock of my life when I saw Kirsten's familiar truck rolling up the driveway and making a screeching sound as it stopped. The woman got out. I remember thinking, what the heck does she want? This is all I need, another confrontation with the woman from the diner. I opened the front door as she neared her approach. "Can I come in?" she asked me, looking ever so slightly bashful. "I'm probably the last person you want to see. I do realise that." "I've heard via the grapevine you're an au pair now. Word gets around fast in these parts." "That's right," I said tightly. "Come in." Little Amelia was on a little swing set in the kitchen and chuckled happily to see our new visitor. "So this is your charge," said Kirsten, leaning over to give Amelia her little cheeks a tug. "She's adorable. This beats waiting tables any day of the week." "What do you want, Kirsten?" I asked stiffly. "I want to apologise to you for the way I treated you at the diner. It was unacceptable to treat you like that. I'm so sorry for turning the townsfolk against you too. It was very wrong." "Why the change of heart?" I asked, busying myself by putting a kettle on the gas hob to make some coffee for my guest. "Because I'm a bloody idiot, that's why," she said, showing me the glittering diamond now on her finger. "You're married?" I gasped. "That's incredible. Who's the lucky man?" "Last weekend I remarried my husband Dustin, the man you went out to drinks with. We both went off to Vegas to tie the knot." "But why? I don't understand. I thought you were divorced." "Because we love each other, that's why. We can't live without each other. But for so long we've been at each other's throats, suspicious, jealous all the time. We've been receiving counselling to curb those issues in our lives. The therapist believes we both have issues with trust, as we are victims of being abandoned by our mothers early in life, which has affected our personal relationships. It turns out that my husband is staunchly loyal. He told the therapist that after I came along, he's never given another woman a fleeting glance. Well, I'm very happy for you, and congratulations on your wedding. But I promise you, I only went out with him for a drink. I wasn't interested in him, as lovely as he is, but he's not my type. I know, Dustin told me. He said he had to push you to agree to have that drink with him, that you weren't keen at all. He also affirmed you had no clue that he was my ex. That's why he actually asked you for that drink. So he was using me as a pawn on a chess game to make you jealous, I said. Something like that. I'm really sorry, Tamara. It's all right, I said, giving my friend a warm hug. I'm glad the dust has settled. I would hate to have lost our friendship. But promise me any time soon you won't be throwing peppermints at me or breaking any glass. I promise, she giggled. To cut a long story short, I worked as an au pair for Hannah and her husband for over 6 years and became an intrinsic member of their family and a godmother to little Amelia. Hannah's husband introduced me to his younger brother, Roy. The moment we met, well, let's just say we fell hard for each other. So we got married and had 3 children of our own that have long since fled the nest. I have never shared this story with anyone before, because there are some things best left unsaid. Until now, in this forum, when I thought I'd get my story told. After all, Amelia is fully grown now. I realise the creature who changed her nappy for a diaper of vine leaves was in fact a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, the year was 1972, a beautiful tranquil day in a green leafy neighbourhood outside Spokane, Washington. It was early spring, and the flower beds were bursting with colourful blooms in reds, pinks, purples, blues, yellows, whites, a kaleidoscope of visually enticing colours, while the viridescent green manicured lawns, hedges, climbing shrubs had been manicured to perfection by the local residents, the recent rainfall filling the air with an intoxicating dewy freshness, where the smell of sweet mown grass permeated the crisp, vibrant morning with a heady, pleasing infusion. The crab-apple trees and flowering plums, curvaceous boughs, were graciously caressed with the ethereal, pretty spring blossoms, while the golden sunshine smiled down upon the earth with a generous, hugging warmth that enveloped you in the quintessential, cheerful essence of a perfect spring day. A couple of jubilant children were riding their bicycles down the long ribbon of asphalt, framed on either side by large verdant lawns with long lines of statuesque mature oak trees. A young woman appeared to be walking her little Scotty terrier down the street, who was sniffing everything in sight with a rambunctious enthusiasm, while his tail was wagging profusely. It was the quintessential idyllic picture of urban bliss, as urban meets country, as further down the road the neighbourhood was flanked by thriving prodigious wood groves full of fabulous outdoor hiking trails filled with clusters of ponderosa pines and Douglas firs, their towering pyramid shapes, long slender trunks and bobbing needled boughs penciling up into the cobalt blue sky like graceful verdant jewels. Zinnia Adams instinctively sensed that something wasn't quite right. She had returned to her white truck after visiting the residence at number 42. Something about her interaction with the couple, the parents of 2 young kids, was decidedly odd. Her antennae were wagging like a dog's exuberant tail, a soft nudge, alerting her senses to pay attention. Should she be concerned? Probably not. After all, she was an estate agent with a job that needed doing. These people wanted to sell their property. But the question looming in the back of her mind like a bright red warning flag was why? The slightly standoff, not over-friendly couple had made idle chit-chat with her, giving each other furtive, sneaky sideway glances when they thought she wasn't looking, but she'd seen it all. They had been quite evasive when answering her questions, as if privy to a deep, dark secret that they didn't want to share. They had dutifully shown her around the beautiful, very elegant, stylish home, of which no expense had been spared. An architect's creation where the classic old-world charm of Georgian influences from the original house was married seamlessly with more modern, sophisticated, open-plan living at its finest. All the alterations were very new, elaborate, state-of-the-art, that had been created for them at a vast expense, and, of course, using creative ingenuity, a unique home in its own right, which had clearly been a labour of love, where the couple had put their soul and heart into this property, along with their hopes, dreams and aspirations. The house positively reeked individuality and savoir-faire. It was without doubt one of the most stunning, breathtakingly beautiful houses in the neighbourhood. They had extended the property so seamlessly, as if all the additions were part of the original design. No easy feat by any stretch of the imagination. They'd even added a designer kitchen to the property that would make Gordon Ramsay quite literally drool. No one planning to sell their property for an excellent price would go out of a limb to invest in the most extravagant fixtures, fittings and appliances in order to align someone else's nest with such finery. I mean, why would a magpie put hundreds of its glittering nuggets into a blue martin's nest for the blue martin to enjoy? That would be incredulous. If you were investing in your home for the purposes of selling, you would settle for something classy, classic, but affordable, but you wouldn't spend a fortune when it wasn't necessary. That was not a savvy or astute business decision to make. Zinnia sat in her car, tapping her fingers awkwardly on the steering wheel, while she put on the radio to listen to some relaxing music, to settle the rising level of angst that she was beginning to feel. She couldn't shake off her sharpened instincts that were stabbing her gently like a finger in the gut, whispering into her mind like a gentle, all-knowing wind, that something was distinctly off. She tried to review her meeting with the couple in her head, again gauging the reactions from her clients like an inconspicuous fly on the wall, assessing and meditating on all the couple's clandestine, covert, underhanded gestures, mannerisms and movements, what they said, and of course more notably what they did not say, for very often in her experience the things left unsaid were the most revelatory of all. "Why are you selling?" she'd asked. "I mean, your house is so beautiful. I can see you've put your heart and soul into the property, invested a lot of your money in this prestigious project. You've only just completed the renovations for your property. Why on earth would you sell?" That was when she had noticed the circumspect, furtive glances between the woman and her husband. The woman trembled awkwardly, avoiding her gaze. It was clear that her evasive, slinky, shady eyes held in their depths a masked secret that she was not willing to unveil. I just think it would be nice to have a change," she had said. The answer was so vague, indeterminate, non-committal, words that weren't solid in their foundations, but crumbled in your hands like broken pieces of pottery. "But I don't understand," Zinnia had said. "I mean, you're in a prime location here, close to the woods, open hiking trails, not to mention schools and shopping facilities. Why on earth would you want to leave this place?" "Because we do." The father had jumped into the conversation like a leaping frog, darting over the water lilies to get to his buzzing quarry before anybody else did. It was as if he was mindfully afraid his wife's lips might lead her astray and let the cat out of the bag. He was behaving like a man who was determined to shroud their secret with an obscure blanket in the desperate hope that it would remain unobserved. But in Zinnia's mind he was not fooling anyone except himself, for his defensive, guarded reactions had almost certainly given him away. He was definitely hiding something. "Yes, but that kitchen of yours. I mean, it's the most exquisite kitchen I've ever seen. I mean, that kitchen is built for a professional." "My wife is a fabulous cordon bleu cook," said the man proudly, putting his arms around his wife protectively in a defensive stance, while the wife gave him a warning look, as if to say, "You've said too much. Watch your words." "I know. It's a lovely kitchen," she said, but we still want to sell," said the man, interrupting his wife. "Well, your house is ready to put on the market as ASAP. We'll be able to organise an open day this weekend if you like. There's nothing you need to do to attract these buyers. You'll have people fighting over this place at, of course, the right price." "Good. Well, do it," said the man, whose name was Christopher Hoggins. "We'd like a quick sale, and the faster the better." Zinnia sat back in her white truck, studying the beautiful street, the verdant lawns, the area flanked by woodland trees. She wondered why on earth this young couple would sell. This was the perfect spot for many a young couple to raise their kids. "They're keeping something from me. I know they are, and I want to find out exactly what it is." Zinnia climbed out of her truck with a steely grit and determination, determined to find answers. She knew she ran the risk of the owner refusing to use their agency to sell their property, and that would go down with her boss, Christina Macmillan, with about as much popularity as a lead balloon. She could already see her boss laying into her hard. "If they want to sell, Zinnia, it's their business. Who are we to poke our noses in their affairs? It's more business for us. Why on earth should we look a gift horse in the mouth? Tell me that." Unlike a lot of agents, Zinnia was hardwired with a code of ethics. Perhaps it was something to do with being a pastor's daughter, but she had very clear, distinct views about what was wrong and what was right. She didn't want to sell a house if she knew there was something intrinsically wrong with it. That wouldn't be right, nor would it be fair to any future owners. She would never want to guilefully deceive or manipulate someone into buying a property based on a fat commission check glittering in her future. Any potential buyers to their property needed to know what they were ploughing their hard-earned money into, much like you need to know that adding a red T-shirt to your white laundry has the potential to turn it bright pink. No one in their right mind would sell a house like this unless they were leaving the country, moving out of state, or unless they had to based on a financial necessity. Maybe the couple had spent too much, were up to their ears in debt. But then why would they not have told her as much, under the parasol of client confidentiality? That occasionally happened on her watch, people who had overextended themselves financially. But she did presume that not to be the case in this unlikely scenario. The signs would be clear to see. The young woman herself was wearing a dress she'd seen in the window at one of the illustrious boutiques in town only the other day. She had personally shuddered with horror at the outrageous over-the-top price tag when she'd gleaned the price. No one would buy high-end clothing like this if they were counting pennies, would they? So something was seriously off. It was like a whiff in the air that she couldn't identify, but she was onto it like a bloodhound. She wouldn't be happy until she could distinguish its source. She made the swift journey back to the gleaming red front door, hampered only by the click-clock of her inappropriate high-heeled sandals that she wished to God she wasn't wearing. They slowed down her approach as she tottered up the sandstone tiles that led to the front door. She admired the 2 large pots of hanging petunias and lobelia that framed the entrance, along with a big front doormat with a sign "Welcome" embossed in gold. She peered through the vertical window superbly fitted with its stained-glass designs of blue irises, and banged boldly on the horseshoe knocker while ringing the doorbell. The intercom burst out into the familiar kids' tune, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." She intuitively perceived that the friendly couple would possibly not be best pleased to see her again, since she'd only left moments before. Now she was back like a nasty mosquito that wouldn't leave you alone, that they secretly probably wished they could swat. Christopher Hoggins opened the door, his face registering surprise to see Zinnia standing there again. She could see his jaw stiffen, his hazel eyes tighten and squint. There was a taut, rigid tension that swept through his body as he pulled his chest erect from its previous slouch position in a protective stance, to give the impression that he was bigger than he actually was, which animals tend to do when facing a predator to appear more intimidating in the wild. Was he seeing her in this light, she secretly wondered? It seemed more than likely. "May I come in?" she asked. "It'll only be for a moment." Christopher shrugged his shoulders in a nonchalant way, but the concern in his eyes was not easily disguised. "Be my guest," he said as he opened the door and led Zinnia directly into the kitchen, where his wife was bustling away, stirring at a red concoction vigorously on the gas range that looked suspiciously like tomato sauce. "That smells very good," she said. "What are you making? I think I can smell basil, garlic, oregano, tomatoes. Is it some kind of sauce?" "That's right. I'm making a tomato base for a pizza," said the woman, wiping her hands on her apron and joining her husband's side. A worried expression developed on her face. "My kids, they love pizza. It's their absolute favourite food. Obviously, as a mum, I try to make it healthy for them. I never buy those awful pizza sauces in the shop. You know, the secret to a good pizza's a good sauce, a homemade one, along with a delicious crispy base." "Is everything all right?" she asked. Why are you back so quickly? Is there a problem with anything we discussed? Have we overlooked something?" "I was hoping you could answer that question for me yourself." "Look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to say it as it is. I don't buy your story about why you want to sell. It makes absolutely no sense to me. I know you're holding back something. I need to know what it is if I'm going to be your agent. Is your house haunted? Have you been experiencing supernatural phenomena since your alterations? It does happen. This wouldn't be the first time on my watch. But so as you know, any potential buyers need to know if your house is haunted." At that, Christopher Hoggins burst out laughing. "Haunted? No, I can assure you it's not haunted." "Well then, what's wrong with it? What are you not telling me? As far as I can see, there is no rising damp, no black mould, no termites, roaches, rats, or horrible neighbours. Well, as far as I can see anyway, although the latter I'm not sure about. So if you're not living next door to the axe murderer from hell, what in fact is going on? Unless of course this is a sensitive issue regarding finances, and you can guarantee my discretion in regards to this matter." "Christopher, for goodness sake, just tell her," said his wife suddenly. "Tell her. This girl is a hell of a sharp. We can't pull the wool over her eyes." Christopher looked awkward. He guided Zinnia with his sweeping hand gestures outside the kitchen into the living room, and proceeded to pour everyone a tot of whiskey. I don't drink," said Zinnia. "Well, not while I'm on the job, anyway. My boss would have kittens if she saw me doing so." "Believe me, you're going to need it," he said. Zinnia gulped down the whisky, not enjoying the taste, as the tart acidity of the drink scratched the back of her throat. She nearly gagged. "Well, I'll tell you the story, shall I?" said the wife. "Well, whether you're going to believe it or not, that is questionable, and I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But it actually did happen. It was on a Tuesday night a month ago. My little daughter Madeline, who is 7, came running into my bedroom. She was hysterical. She said there was a monster tapping at her bedroom window and making funny faces at her. Naturally, she was absolutely terrified. To even go back into her bedroom, she claimed she wanted to sleep with Mummy and Daddy. Moments later, my other daughter Tammy, who's 8, was seeing the very same thing. At first I thought my daughter was having a bad dream, but with 2 of them claiming to have seen a monster at the window, my concerns were naturally raised. Unless, of course, they were feeding each other nonsensical imaginings, which kids can do. The same thing happened again for 2 consecutive nights. So that was when I decided to investigate their irrational, unfounded claims by going through the motions. I asked them to show Mummy where the monster was. They pointed to the window. I pulled back the curtain. I nearly had a heart attack. There really was a monster on the other side of the window, staring in at us. I mean, that was the last thing I expected to see. And this thing, it was hideous. "Are you sure someone wasn't playing tricks on you? A neighbourhood prank, perhaps," said Zinnia, not knowing how to react to the couple's outrageous, idiosyncratic, preposterous proclamations. "Oh no, this thing was real. Oh, it was. I know exactly what I saw. A monster is an apt description for him. In fact, I don't know what else I'd call him. I know I must sound completely loopy, but I assure you this hideous thing, this grotesque thing was real. I screamed for my husband. He came running, asking me what the heck was going on. Can you believe it? But this brazen-faced, truculent thing was so treacherously audacious, precocious, haughty even. It didn't even run away. It squashed its horrendous, protrusive, ugly face against the window and glared in at us with these malevolent, menacing red eyes. It was like he was smiling vindictively at us in the way the wolf did in the story of Red Riding Hood, with the "I want to eat you" kind of look. It sent shivers down my spine. This thing was hideously grotesque, evil, but it was definitely toying with us like a cat playing with its food, biding its time. It was revelling and taking a great deal of pleasure from our unease. "So did you see it too?" asked Zinnia, addressing Christopher Hoggins directly. "Oh, I saw it all right. I think it wanted us all to see it. The kids were crying and screaming. At first I didn't know how to react, as this thing was so outlandish, so peculiar, so surreal." "What did it look like?" Zinnia asked. "It had the body of a man, obviously much bigger. It was tall, though, possibly about 7 foot. The face of a man, but the muzzle of a wolf or dog, with sharp rows of canine teeth that he kept exposing to us, as if trying to intimidate us. It worked. It really worked. We both were so freaked out. We actually wet our pants." "Did you call the sheriff?" "Absolutely not. I'm a highly regarded solicitor," said Christopher. "I can't afford my reputation to be trampled in the mud, lest I should be made a laughing-stock. My reputation and credibility are everything to me. If it's undermined in any way, my business will go shooting down the drainpipe, along with any potential clients, and that I can assure you of." "Did you go after the creature?" asked Zinnia. "I did. It fled after I fired a couple of shots at it. The problem is that he was back every night, again and again, tormenting us, knocking on the windows, crashing around on our roof, walking on the tiles, making a god-awful commotion, as well as banging our metal drain pipes, and, worst of all, staring at us through the windows with his bright red eyes. I promise you, he's getting off on scaring us, Bridget. It's like he gets a buzz out of it. He's thoroughly enjoying himself, while the rest of us are living in terror. We are all sleeping in the same bed at night. My children, they're not coping. They're both staying with their grandmother in Olympia. We can't continue like this. The creature will not leave us alone. I try to go after it, but it's as elusive as the Scarlet Pimpernel. I fire shots at it, and then it stealthily escapes. We can't live like this in a perpetual state of horror. It's only a matter of time before the activity escalates to something infinitely more grisly. And I assure you, it's only a matter of time." "Which is why you want to sell, so that somebody else inherits your pestering problem." We want to sell because we don't feel safe in our home anymore. It's as simple as that. I've tried to kill the creature. I rarely have. I can't. What am I supposed to do? I'm worried about my children, about their welfare. I have to put security first when it comes to my family. Fair enough. I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate that you want your family's safety above everything else, and that makes sense to me. But I'm going to be straight with you. We're going to put your property on the market and have an open day as you wish. But I'm going to tell the buyer about why you are selling. Of course, they may find your story preposterous, so if they buy your house, it'll be on their own backs. But then my conscience is personally clear. It wouldn't be ethical to warn them. We have to tell them the truth. So you don't think we're crazy? Asked Christopher. I think you're crazy to sell your beautiful home. But if you feel your family's in danger, then you're doing what you feel you need to do, and you need to follow your gut. Zinnia returned to her truck, and she sat there for a while trying to absorb what the couple had told her. They seemed compos mentos. He was a solicitor, for goodness sake. They were a highly intelligent couple. But all this stuff about monsters, well, it was rather ridiculous, ludicrous, deranged and off the wall, surely. Still, she would do what she needed to do, and no matter how silly she looked, she would warn any potential clients about the menacing hazard of an anomalous monster scaring a family out of their home. It had to be told. Zinnia wondered if someone was playing a practical joke on the couple, or someone was nursing a grudge. Maybe a client who got a bad deal from a divorce settlement wanted to scare the living daylights out of the family in the form of some kind of insidious revenge. This case was exceedingly bizarre. But she was certain of one thing. The couple did seem to be genuinely afraid. As Zinnia had expected, a sale from the property was immediate, and the offers had come flying in like hordes of confetti dropping from the sky. She hadn't expected anything less. After all, it was a gorgeous property, in a sought-after location that she knew would be snapped up at once. She wasn't wrong. The couple who did purchase the property had been well informed about the reason the previous owners were selling. She had remembered their astonished reactions, as if they found the idea of the family being hounded by a monster utterly ridiculous. "They told you this?" said the woman, looking aghast, "that they were selling because of a monster that had been terrorising them?" "That's right. Look, I'm just an estate agent," Zinnia assured them. "I want to find out why they were selling. This is what they told me. It's up to you to decide whether you still want to buy the property based on what I've told you. It's all in your hands now." "Hell yes, we want to buy it," said the man. "An anomalous monster is hardly going to scare us off. Why, the idea is completely ludicrous." Sandra's account, the new homeowner. I couldn't believe that me and my husband Paddy, along with our 2 5-year-old twins, Oliver and Jamie, had moved into this phenomenal, resplendent home that was like a dream come true. I mean, that premier kitchen, it just blew my mind away, fitted with the most incredible restaurant-quality technology, with an orange-red Aga imported directly from Britain, along with these fabulous range ovens with gas hobs. Then there was the personalised, exclusive white-painted cabinetry, much fronted with glass, a breadboard, ceiling along with a buffet-ready island fitted with very extravagant granite countertops. The rest of the house was superb, very luxurious, with no expense remotely spared. It would seem that the frantic sellers had snatched up our offer eagerly, as if they couldn't move away fast enough from what had ostensibly been their dream home, that had come crashing down on their faces like a smashed piece of china crockery. It was sad, really. We were benefiting from their misfortune. By all intents and purposes, according to Zinnia, the estate agent, they were a professional couple, highly regarded by the community. So their desire to leave the property based on a monster who had hounded their home seemed a little incredulous. I was a hardened cynic about stuff like this. Even ghostly paranormal phenomena carried no weight with me whatsoever. Although, had we been told by the estate agent that the house was haunted, we might have been a lot more reluctant to sign on the dotted line. I was still pinching myself to have acquired a top-notch house like this that should have cost us a lot more, but the previous owners wanted to cut their losses and just run. It did leave me with a slight malaise and a restlessness void, but I refused to allow that to cloud my judgment, as I was excited about our bright future, living in such an exquisite part of the world, a prime location. My husband Paddy had been a lot more restrained about our impulsive purchase, worrying that maybe we jumped into the deep end too soon, before we could swim. But I quickly brought him to his senses, assuring him that there was no such thing as monsters, and whatever had been troubling the couple had to have been something else. "Of course I know that, sweetheart, but I believe the couple that lived here didn't just sell up and leave for no good reason at all. Something scared the bejesus out of them. Let's not kid. Whatever it is, I hope it doesn't come back to bite us. That's all I'm saying." I'm glad to say my husband and I became comfortably assured that the previous owners of our property may have just seen a bear, or someone had been playing an obscene, hideous trick on them. I really did like Zinnia's suggestion that a piqued, chagrined ex-client of the solicitors on the receiving end of a nasty divorce settlement, upon which he felt aggrieved, had decided to retaliate by scaring the family rigid, by dressing up in a malicious, realistic disguise to extract his ultimate revenge. That made a lot more sense to me. The twins were loving the brand new home, but I had to change the decor in the bedrooms, as both rooms were done in pretty girlish pinks, and I had 2 boys, so it was a prerequisite for me to change the decor to blue. By all accounts, I was an average, mediocre cook, but with a sensational kitchen like mine, it demanded that I enrolled in a cookery course to improve my culinary prowess, to sharpen my skills as a bona fide chef. A month after having settled into our new home, after a pleasurable evening on the Italian cookery course, where I'd been learning the art of making fluffy potato gnocchi. Who knew it would be so easy? And to think I'd been buying it all these years in those nasty, tight cellophane containers made me shudder. When all you needed to do was to bake a few potatoes, throwing a few casual ingredients together, like Parmesan cheese, parsley, eggs and flour, and voila, you had the most sensational gnocchi. I was learning on my course that simplicity, fabulously fresh ingredients, were the true art of good, fine Italian cuisine. I was musing over this with my takeaway bags on the opposite seat to mine on the truck that I was driving that evening back home, the scant remnants of what I had made. I knew once my husband had a taste of this black truffle gnocchi, he would be in heaven. He was already complaining about the cost to his waistline of my newly acquired culinary talents. "Perhaps it is better if you remain an average mediocre cook, because if you continue to cook this outstanding way, I might not be able to squeeze my way out of the front door," he had joked to me. "I was 175 pounds when I moved in here. Now I'm 190, and I hold you responsible. After your cooking went skyrocketing from a C- to an A+. We had laughed, giggled together, enjoying a glass of Prosecco as we clinked glasses together while appreciating our twinkling bright new home that sparkled and gleamed with the promises of hopes for the future. It was very quiet on the long, lonely drive home. I could see a few lights in some of the local houses, but at 10 in the evening those lights were much more scant. It was a velvety black night with a cool breeze blowing in the air. It had been a little nippy when I'd left the cookery course. In truth, I hated driving at night, but it was worth the effort as my cooking had come on in leaps and bounds. Even the Italian chef, Pier Montinaro, had commented that I was a natural cook, and coming from an Italian master chef himself, well, that was a big compliment. I puffed myself up like a self-indulgent, egotistical penguin as I drove down the long ribbon of asphalt towards my home. I'd been out during the evening 3 nights a week, but on this particular occasion something seemed different. The tall oak trees that graced the sides of the street seemed denser, more foreboding, and quite frankly, more than a little doleful, like sultry giants swaggering in the wind, as though slightly intoxicated, but it was the way the shadows danced through the trees that disturbed me the most. It was the ideal outer-worldly ambience for you to see a ghost floating through the trees, if you believed in that sort of thing, of course. I didn't, but on this occasion I felt something was seriously off. I finally drove up the little driveway towards the 2 garages. I could see all the lights were off in the house apart from a flickering light that was left on in the television room, where my husband was possibly watching a movie, as he was waiting for me to return home from my cookery course, possibly drinking back a couple of Gatorades and eating some salted popcorn while he waited. I imagine he'd already bathed the twins, tucked them into bed, read them a bedtime story. I decided to park my truck outside the garage this evening, as the garage door, though brand new, made a god-awful squawking sound that could potentially wake up the entire household. As I parked my truck, I closed the door behind me, walking over to the passenger side of the door to extract the packages of leftovers from the cookery class that were now on the seat. All of a sudden I could feel a discernible presence behind me, which I thought had to be my husband. After all, who else could it be? How nice of him, I thought. He'd come out to welcome me back after hearing my truck in the driveway. "Look what I've got for you," I said, turning around, lifting up the package in my hand. But the figure standing only a few feet away from me was not my husband. It was, and I say it was, a monster. The creature was 7 foot tall, covered in dark matted hair with a human-like face and a dog-like muzzle. It was the most grotesque, hideously evil thing that I've ever seen in my entire life, with hands like a human's, but heavily taloned with dog-like claws, only these were sharp and jagged, and could have torn a man limb from limb into shreds. The creature glared at me through these malevolent, evil-looking red eyes. Smoke seemed to emanate from his nostrils. He growled at me, a vicious, malevolent, evil growl. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and the creature bolted away, grabbing my food parcels in my hand. My husband came bolting out of the house, his eyes wide with terror. "I thought someone was being murdered. What the heck is going on?" I began to tremble violently, pointing hopelessly in the direction of where the creature had gone. My arms jiggling with nervousness, my throat clouded up, as if there was a golf ball in the back of my mouth. I've seen a monster. It's real. It was here. It was growling at me. I thought it was going to kill me." My husband's face grew ashen and grave. He knew I was the least inclined person to make up something like this. The following week I was too skittish to go to any more cooking classes. I was terrified of returning home to face that monstrous thing again, for there is no telling what a creature like that is capable of. If I had not scared him off with my ear-piercing screams, well, I dread to think. I was beginning to wonder about the safety of my family members, and could totally understand why the previous owners had sold. If I had any comprehension of what this thing had been like, I would never have bought the house myself, never in a million years. One night as we were fast asleep in our beds, we awoke to hear shuffling footsteps on our roof. There was a clanging, banging, crashing sound that put the fear of God into every fibre of my being. I knew in my gut that the monstrous creature was back. "It's out there!" I cried in terror, as anguished tears poured down my face. "Oh, my God! It's out there! What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" My 2 twins came rushing into the bedroom, their faces brimming over with tears, as they clutched their teddy bears tightly. "Mummy! Daddy! I'm scared! There's a monster out there! He was looking in at us in the window!" My husband grabbed his rifle, ventured boldly out of doors, with me tagging behind him, telling my kids to stay in the house, that Mummy wanted to see something. What we witnessed that night is of what the most horrendous nightmares are made of. On our roof were 2 nimble, agile-looking, Herculean-sized towering creatures, although one completely dwarfed the other in size and width and girth and weight. They were fighting each other viciously, with a fierce anger that stung the atmosphere. They were lashing out at each other with brazen-fisted punches, hectic lethal lashes, using the timber poles they were carrying in their hands. There were growls, snorts, grunts, hisses, and very alarming roars that made my knees buckle beneath me like wobbling kitchen chairs. At first I thought I was seeing 2 of these things, but then I realized that one of these creatures was distinctly different to the other. This idiosyncratic, anomalous creature was much, much bigger than the other one with the dog-like muzzle. This one was built like a giant human being, easily over 9 foot tall, covered in a plethora of dark hair, with a distinctive gable-shaped head that was slung low on the shoulders, a human-looking face with a prominent furrowed forehead, high cheekbones, and deep-set dark eyes. Now I know it was a Bigfoot. Back then I had no clue what this thing was. The other creature, the one that looked to be half man and half dog, possessed a very distinguished black tail, with a white line of hairs down the central column, that to date I don't think I've ever seen on a dog's tail. I noticed that the tail very much twitched as the creature fought. The creatures were agile, seamless in their movements, but the Bigfoot creature was much larger, more impressive in size than the dog-like humanoid. I will say that if ever in my life I have seen hatred close up and personal, never more so than expressed on my roof that night, as under a cluster of silvery stars and a crescent luminescent moon, the creatures continued to fight, hitting the timber poles at each other, their nostrils flaring, their eyes bright balls of red fire, their mouths open to display their teeth in an intimidating defiance. I assure you, had you yourself had a bird's-eye view on this occasion of those 2 creatures, you would almost certainly say that those 2 creatures were fighting to the death. There was not even a fleeting doubt in my mind about this. My husband began cocking his rifle, showering the air with bullets, designed to scare both the creatures off, to get them off our roof, whatever in God's name they were. The creatures looked down at my husband, while the Bigfoot-like creature used the momentary power of distraction to lunge towards the dog-like humanoid, throwing him off the roof with one push. I promise you he went somersaulting down the roof, landing directly on his cushioned feet, as if nothing had happened. He landed on the grassy turf with the grace of a domestic tabby. It snarled up at the Bigfoot with an enraged expression upon its face, and roared. In a trice the Bigfoot was off the roof, chasing the dog-like creature through the backyard to the wooded area. I was terrified, clutching my husband tightly, cursing the very day we'd laid eyes on this cursed home. As much like the previous homeowner, I wanted out. My husband prepared me a tot of brandy. We went to bed that night with thoughts of putting our house on the market looming to the front of our mind. We couldn't live here with things like that loitering around in our backyard. How would we ever feel safe again? It was like living in Jurassic Park. I was fast asleep when my husband awoke me up in the early hours the following morning. I was annoyed. He was exhilarated. "You won't believe what happened," he said, his eyes round with excitement. "I don't think we have to sell our house after all. I think the hideous thing that has been hounding us is dead." I trembled on my words. "How do you even know that?" I asked. "This," he said, thrusting the dog-like humanoid's decapitated tail with the white central panel into my hand. I shrieked, looking at the tail and aghast. "Where did you get that?" I heard a rapping at the door. I went to answer it, opening the door very slightly. Obviously I was nervous, given what happened last night. But who should be standing there in the doorway but the very creature that looked like a hairy man on our roof? And through the small opening of the door, he handed me the tail. I promise you, sweetheart, as God is my witness, I looked into his eyes. Oh, they were kind eyes. I heard the words in my head. "It's been taken care of. You're all right." "What?" I asked, sitting up in shock. "Are you kidding me?" "No, I'm not," said my husband, positively gleaming. Suffice to say, we never had any more visits from what I perceive must have been a very aggressive dog man. As for the Bigfoot, I feel assured knowing he's out there, watching over us, keeping our neighbourhood free of those dog-like humanoids. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I sat there staring vacantly at my computer, whirling myself around on the leather swivel chair awkwardly, at the chestnut desk in my bedroom, my mind heavily weighted down with the gloomy, despondent, tormenting feelings that had been bothering me for a considerably long period of time, like the remnants of a very bad flu that you haven't quite shaken off yet. These hammering, unrelenting thoughts had been like sharp knives stabbing me in the guts, an unceasing, frenzied attack, almost as if I was being stung over and over again by a buzzing hive of angry, belligerent bees, mad at me for disturbing their nest. The numbing stings from each attack made the feelings I was experiencing even more intense and defined. I stared at the blank white screen, as instinctively I tapped the indelible words written in the secret depths of my heart in seemingly invisible ink, transferring them directly with my quick-tapping fingers to the keyboard, until the cryptic words flashed provocatively on the overbright screen. Words that were almost dirty, shameful, hidden, concealed words that should not be brushed, well, should be brushed under the carpet, sheltered from prying eyes. But now they were plain to see, clear as day, my feelings exposed on a computer keyboard, no longer buried in the dark recesses of my mind, but downloaded onto a word processor. The words, "A wolf knows when it's being raised by bears," stared back at me. I had written exactly what I was feeling. As somewhere in the foggy mist of my intuition, a hazy veil had shrouded the shameful bitter truth that had concealed this underlying intrinsic knowledge that I had evaded for so long, that had been downloaded into the very fabric of my DNA. I didn't want to see what my inner eye had discerned a very long time ago, when I was a mere 7-year-old boy. Now I was 13. It was like everything in the natural world, the trees, the fluffy white clouds, the verdant green turf, knew it all. A mulberry tree knows if the leaves it's carrying on its boughs are not its own. A daffodil knows it has a yellow head of petals. A blue martin knows the colour of its own feathers. I knew that I was not the offspring of my parents. I knew it, and where this arresting unsought-for knowledge had come from, charging so audaciously into my understanding, with the impertinence of a male peacock strutting its stuff, I honestly do not know. But it was there, as bright as day, staring me blindly in the face. There was nothing about my parents that would make you perceive that I was not theirs. If I had been born with oriental looks, the distinguishing differences would have been so profound, the evidence remarkably clear to see. Unable to be hidden or covered up, as everyone would know without question that that kid was certainly adopted. It would be a given. In my case, the evidence was clearly concealed, so subtly that it was inconspicuous. My mother's face wore an expression of huge relief, her tense, frightened brown eyes visibly relaxed. She even managed a half-hearted smile, but I could see through the bravado, as her smile did not reach her eyes. There was a troubled, concerned expression that hovered over her face like a seagull over a sandy beach. It was very clear to see. "What's wrong with a child being adopted?" my father had said. "I mean, if two loving parents want to look after a child that is not their own, well, I think it's a very agreeable thing to do, don't you?" "Do you think that the parents, knowing the child isn't their own biologically, that they might actually love it less?" "Of course not," said my mother, leaping into the conversation with a defensive defiance. "Of course not. Why should the parents love the child any less if it's adopted? That idea is nonsensical. Of course the parents would love the child as their very own. Why would it be any different?" "Do you think the parents are duty-bound to tell their child that it's not their own, should that be the case?" I'd hinted. "Honestly, Leith," said my mother, leaping up from the table very quickly, grabbing my not-yet-finished dinner in her jittering arms that were shaking nervously, as once again my parents exchanged those surreptitious glances. "Leith," she continued, "you do ask some outrageous questions. I mean, what would we know about adoption?" "Precisely," said my father, interjecting. "What would we know about the subject?" "Anyone for ice cream?" my mother asked, which was a clear diversion to change the subject. I had nodded eagerly, because who doesn't like ice cream? But soon afterwards I found my pudding plate bursting with a generous, oversized portion of ice cream, designed to keep my mouth terribly busy eating, rather than talking. But I'd seen enough. I knew I was on to something. I could smell it. My mother was like the most hopeless shoplifter stealing a red sweater from the store, wearing it directly over her head with the shop labels dangling off the garment, but brazenly telling the security guard that she hadn't stolen a bloody thing, when it was as clear as day to see. "But, ma'am," the security guard would be likely to say, "you're wearing the stolen jumper on your head. Everybody can see it." My mother's suspicious, guilty behaviour was screaming the words, "You're adopted, son. Get over it. Big deal." I expressed my misgivings to my best friend Oscar when we were riding down the hiking trail in the woods, passing a couple of dog walkers who waved at us as we made our merry way. Me and Oscar parked our bikes against a couple of ponderosa pine trees as we left the sprawling woodgrove to walk through the luxuriant long grass of the flowering meadow, where the heads of pretty pink and blue flowers bobbed between the grassy blades, while over and above this verdant oasis spring butterflies danced from one flower to another like lacy pieces of confetti floating in the breeze. It was a perfect day. The blissful beams of spring sunshine showered our bodies in a radiant, pleasurable warmth that was not too hot but pleasant. I loved the weather like this. Absolutely perfect. We ambled towards a meandering silvery stream, where a few willow trees dangled over the water, their long, sweeping, graceful arched boughs with a plethora of lance-shaped leaves caressing the water's surface like hundreds of viridescent green feather boas. Water jutted over the rocks with a feisty discharge, creating a myriad of foaming white bubbles, while the crashing, thunderous sounds were so soothing to the ears, as all over the valley the cheerful chirruping calls of the songbirds could be heard. This was the quintessential favourite spot for me and my best friend Oscar. We loved it here. We would frequent it regularly. It was close to our homes in a leafy green Washington neighbourhood, where the countryside opened out into our back door, a mere bicycle journey from both of our houses, as we both only lived a few houses apart. So coming here you felt as if you were alone in an idyllic wilderness that was a rich, sumptuous haven for a teeming abundance of indigenous wildlife, from deers, raccoons, squirrels, foxes, wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, and the list goes on and on. "Let's sit over here," I said, pointing to the slightly wet outcrop of rocks overlapping the water's edge. "It doesn't matter if we get a wee bit of spray on us. Besides, we can throw pebbles directly into the water." And that is exactly what we did. "I think I'm adopted, Oscar," I announced. For a moment you could have heard a pin drop. And then, as if on cue, my friend spluttered, "What?" "You heard. I think I'm adopted." Oscar crinkled his forehead in a long line of furrows and picked up a rock to hurl in the water. We watched as the rock lunged in the air and then went splashing into the depths of the water. It sunk, gone from our sight. Oh, how I wished this adoption thing hanging over me could disappear like that. But it was eating me up on the inside like an insatiable worm that can't be satisfied. "What the heck makes you think that?" I repeated my cryptic words. A wolf knows when it's being raised by bears. My friend raised a quizzical brow. "Wow, bro, that's big. That's deep. How can you possibly come to such a bizarre conclusion?" "Well, how do you know you're not adopted?" I interjected. "'Cause I just know it." "My point exactly. You know you're not adopted. I know I am. I just know." "But that's not good enough, bro. You can't assume something. Have you even asked your parents?" "Well, let's just say we skirted over the subject of adoption. My mother looks as guilty as the dog that tore up the foam mattress while you were out. Is feigning innocent, acting as if the foam isn't even there, never existed, if you know what I mean. You know that I did it look, but I'm pretending I didn't." "Boy, that is heavy. What are you going to do?" "Find out," I said. "But how?" "Well, I'm going to look for the paperwork, aren't I? There has got to be some adoption papers lying around somewhere." "But," protested my friend, "you do look rather like your mother. I mean, you've got her dark brown hair and brown eyes, haven't you? Even your facial features aren't dissimilar." "So what if we have physical features in common? That doesn't mean anything. So does a Douglas and Fraser fir. They look incredibly similar. You could be forgiven for believing they're exactly the same tree, but they are remarkably different in every way." "Woo! You're sure about this?" said Oscar, cocking his head awkwardly. "If you do find out you're adopted, how will it make you feel?" "Angry," I said. "Very angry. How would you feel if you knew you'd been lied to all your life?" "Well, we're only 13, Oscar reminded me. "Maybe they don't want to tell you yet." "I'm old enough to know the truth," I protested indignantly. "I have the right to know who my real family is." "All right, bro. Keep your hair on. There's no need to get flustered. You're like a dog with a bone over this." "Well, I need to know the truth. What's wrong with that?" Over the next couple of days I tried to search surreptitiously through some paperwork in my dad's office when he wasn't looking, but all I encountered was bills and bank statements. You know, the usual boring stuff. Nothing of intrinsic value or worth. But I did happen to go through my mother's bedstand drawers, and I stumbled across a little diary. I know I shouldn't look, but I quickly flicked through the pages. A couple of entries got my attention. "It's difficult living with the guilt. I do want to tell him, but I can't." Another entry read, "I think my son is on to us. I think he knows." I closed the diary, even more determined to find answers. One day after my mother had introduced a new cat from the shelter to our home, a very attractive white and black cat with a distinguished-looking white moustache that we chose to call Hercule Poirot, given the fact that he did look rather like a stylish gentleman. We hadn't gone into the decision to adopt lightly, as we had firmly decided a companion was definitely needed for our marmalade tabby called Herman. As his all-time companion was recently deceased, now buried under the old oak tree that graced our front yard. It seemed that Herman had slipped into a very deep depression after little Yeti had died. They had been as thick as thieves, the two of them together. The introduction between the two cats had gone completely haywire, as they spat at each other, hissing, spitting, growling, with hair standing on edge, while their tails tucked under their bodies. It wasn't pretty, while any attempts to redeem the situation meant that they were in the firing line of razor-sharp cat claws. I had hundreds of nasty scratches all over my hands and arms. My mother was seriously considering calling Jackson Galaxy, the cat behaviourist on television from the television programme My Cat from Hell that graced our television sets in 2011. It would seem that Herman had taken to spraying the whole house with a discharge of his urine, as if to affirm to the new cat that this was his territory. He sprayed his cat litter all over the house to display his rising level of angst, to such an extent that our floors had become an obstacle course for treading your bare feet over unexpected shards of cat litter that could cut into your skin like pieces of glass. Our house was beginning to reek of the heady aroma of cat pee, and it certainly wasn't pleasant. It was when I was bending down under my mother's bed to call out the cowering Hercule Poirot that was staring at me with wide green eyes filled with terror, as Herman was circulating the bed as if he was ambushing the poor thing. And that was when I discerned the tin box hiding in the corner of my mother's bed. It was a light bulb moment for me. Could my adoption papers be hidden in that tin, I wondered? One night when my parents had slipped out to a restaurant for a quick bite to eat, while I'd pretended to have a dodgy stomach, I quickly scurried into their bedroom, retrieving the tin box from under the bed. I opened it hastily with fingers shaking as I looked inside. Sure enough, I found my birth certificate, which did not give anything away, as it was pretty standard. But then I found the adoption papers listing my mother's name and her address, which I was surprised to learn was in fact a woman's prison. There was no mention of my father's name on these papers. Lovely. My true mother was actually incarcerated. It didn't get better than that, did it? I noticed there was a picture of a woman wearing a prison's pair of scrubs, holding a baby in her arms, which I imagine had to be my birth mother. She looked pretty, feminine, with long brown hair and brown eyes. Not what you would expect a prison inmate to look like. I knew at once that this was my mother. I could feel it in every fibre of my being. She looked exactly like me. And the baby in her arms, it was me without a doubt, as I had seen other baby pictures of myself. There was a letter addressed to Richard. Now that wasn't my name, but I sense it was for me. The name that my birth mother had chosen to call me, a name that my adopted parents had failed to honour, which in itself I found to be distasteful, as this poor woman had given up her own son for them to adopt. The least they could have done was given me the name that she had chosen for me. Richard, I thought. I quite liked it. I think I was more of a Richard than a Leith any day of the week. I quickly steamed open the letter, using a kettle to assist me in this very delicate process. The letter read, "Dearest Richard, I'm not giving you up for adoption easily. I want you to know this decision is the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my entire life. For in my short time on this earth, you are without doubt the most precious and blessed thing that could have ever happened to me. I consider it an extreme honour to have carried you in my womb for 9 months. But I know that given my current status as a prisoner in a women's correctional institute, that the wisest thing I can do is to give you up for adoption. You deserve a much better life than what I could offer you. I'm not in a position to financially or emotionally take care of you, but I want you to know, Richard, that you are the greatest, dearest, and most wonderful joy of my life. And wherever you may be, know this, that I love you with all my heart and much, much more. If one day you should desire to look me up, you are more than welcome. You must think me a very bad person to be locked away in a prison. I want to assure you that bad I am certainly not. Foolish, naive, and stupid are more the words you would lay at my door. In short, I saw my boyfriend kill a man in cold blood. He was your birth father, I'm afraid. The less you know about him, the better. Not a good man, I'm afraid. But his behaviour, I believe, is born about from the abusive childhood he endured, rather than whom he was meant to be. I said nothing about his atrocity to anyone, which made me guilty as charged. If the circumstances had been different, nothing in the world would separate me from you, as I would have unequivocally raised you as my very own. But in my current precarious predicament, what kind of life could I ever offer you? Your loving mother, Simone Corder." I began to tremble on the note that I was reading, the tears pouring down my face, as I realised that all my suspicions had been affirmed. I think I was also feeling a measure of relief that I wasn't going completely stark raving mad, and that my feelings were justified that I was adopted, and weren't wrong. Then after the initial shock, it was like all my emotions became expunged from me. I felt vacant and empty, blank like a white page on a computer screen. I went to bed, lying there in the late hours of the night, staring into space, with the kitten whom had previously been so traumatized, now lying safely in my arms. Luckily it seemed that Herman had begun to accept Hercule Poirot's presence in our home. It had happened after Hercule Poirot had allowed Herman to eat his leftover mince, and Herman, who is a very overweight ginger cat, was beginning to see the incredible perks of having a cat around that didn't eat all its food, which invariably meant more food for Herman to enjoy, and that was a no-brainer for him. So within a day the two cats became firm friends. I looked at my new cat and whispered, "We're both adopted." But Hercule Poirot didn't seem to mind. He purred like a little engine. I had heard my parents return home, whispering in the passageway so as not to wake me up. But I had heard everything. The clink of their mugs as they took their cups of piping hot cocoa to bed. The quiet giggles along the hallway. The gentle scuttle of feet trying to be very quiet, tiptoeing to bed. It was weird to think that those two people claiming to be my parents were nothing more than imposters in my life. I could feel the anger bubbling up in the back of my throat. I reached for my cell phone and sent a message to my friend. "It's me. Something's come up. Something important to tell you. Meet you in the woods. 10 minutes. I looked at my phone as a message appeared on the screen. "Can't it wait?" "No," I responded. "Sorry, but it can't." "Okay, see you there. 10 minutes, bro." "This better be good." My response, "You better believe it is." This was not the first time I'd sneaked out of the house to meet my friend in the woodgrove, but I really needed to talk to him about what I'd uncovered. It always helped to have a listening ear. It would seem Oscar was a brilliant listener. He wasn't adverse to giving sound, solid advice. For a 13-year-old boy, he was wise beyond his years. Even my mother had said as much. "I can't believe your son is only 13, she told his mother once. "He's an old head on young shoulders. He really is." Mrs. Ella Saradin had nodded. "He's that all right. He was the one that helped me during the grueling, bitter divorce I went through with his father. You know what he said to me? He said, 'Mum, your marriage was just like a chapter in a book. Turn over the page and it only gets better.' Of course, he was absolutely right." I tiptoed down the passageway of our ranch-style house towards the entrance hall, where the alarm unit with the red button lit up with the words "armed." I tapped in the code. The green light came on, registering the unarmed sign. I tiptoed down the passageway again, unable to conceal the inevitable creaks and groans of the parquet floor that failed to accommodate my stealth-like footsteps. I could hear the soft snores of my father emanating from the main bedroom as I crept back into my room. My parents were both deep sleepers, but just in case they woke up, I puffed up my bed with pillows so it looked like my lumpy fawn was lying in bed under the duvet. I quickly threw on an anorak, a pair of jeans and some sensible brogues, along with my headlamp, and squeezed myself out of the window, where I scampered over to the bicycle shed to grab my bike. Before long I was riding my bicycle down the curved ribbon of asphalt, where the honey locust trees lined each side of the pavement. Luckily there were street lights on, and the occasional house was lit up with energy-saving outside light bulbs, but it was an inky, tenebrous, rather gloomy night, as even the moon seemed shrouded by a veil of foggy mist. The stars seemed obscure, as if they were blotted out from the sky, hiding their twinkling forms beneath the velvety dusk, so as to camouflage their opulence, rather like wearing a thick black heavy coat over a sparkling rhinestone dress. In truth, my whirling emotions were whizzing around my head like fast cars on a highway. I was momentarily distracted, which was hardly surprising, really, given the monumental revelations I'd uncovered this night. So I didn't pay heed to the menacing ambience. If I'd stopped to think about it, or given the matter more than a fleeting thought, I would have noticed that there were no noises you would expect to normally hear. No owl hoots, chirping crickets or croaking frogs. No distant calls of a wolf or coyote on the wind. It was incredibly still. Then I saw him coming out of the dark shadows, holding his bike. A familiar, reassuring figure. It was Oscar. I was so relieved to see him. We parked our bikes in the usual spot, walked through the flowery meadow towards the stream, where we sat next to the water in our usual spot, listening to it crashing over the rocks. "What's this all about, bro?" asked Oscar, furrowing his forehead curiously, looking at me through his steely eyes. "This had better be good," as we sat down on the smooth rocky platforms together, where light sprays of water caressed our shoulders. "It's true," I said. "I'm adopted. I found the papers hidden in a tin under my mother's bed this evening. They've kept the secret from me for over 13 years. Can you believe it?" "I'm sorry, bro. I had no idea. When you were going on and on the other day about believing you were adopted, well, I have to say I seriously thought you were barking up the wrong tree. I even asked my mother if she thought you looked like your parents. She believes you have a striking resemblance to your mother. But all this time you knew. What was it that you said? A wolf knows when it's being raised by bears. Wow, that's right. Remind me if I ever adopt a child in the future to tell them on day one that they're adopted. I see you're not taking this well, bro. I'm angry, I said. I feel betrayed. I mean, why did they keep this from me for so long? Well, maybe they had their reasons. Did you find out anything about your real mum? Yeah, I found a letter she wrote me from prison. She's incarcerated because my father killed a man. She didn't say a word, so that makes her an accessory to the crime. Whew, that's big, brother. I don't know what to say. But maybe her being in prison could be the reason your parents kept very quiet. Maybe, I said. But that's no excuse. What should I do? Be straight with them, bro. Tell them you know. Don't brush it under the carpet. It'll eat you alive. All of a sudden, as we were sitting on the rocks together, discussing the issues about my being adopted, we heard a rather strange sound. It sounded like strange squeaks, along with a movement that was remarkably like heavy feet thumping the ground. What's that? I whispered. Shh, whispered Oscar. Remain very still. Don't move. Then we saw her as she emerged from the shadows, at first a dense, heavy, dark silhouette, as she made her approach. My first impression was that a bear was moving towards us with such an elegant, graceful stride that made the creature look like it was actually floating. It was only as the creature got ever closer that I observed the overlong arms and hands. In that moment I knew this was not a bear. It was a Bigfoot female, as I could see this creature had firm, small breasts, was standing erect at about 7 foot tall, 3 feet wide across the shoulder area, covered in long, flowing dark hair. She looked like a gigantic human being, but muscular, powerful, built like a sturdy piece of farming machinery, or an animal of substantial size, more in line with a rhino, hippo, or elephant, but in a more of a vertical, towering shape like a tree. Her face was so human. I was gobsmacked, as I always assumed a Bigfoot's face would bear a striking resemblance to an ape, but this was not the case. I noticed her skin was a dark coal colour, a leathery texture. It gleamed in the moonlight. Her nostrils flared very flat against her face. Her eyes deep-set and dark, a treacle-looking colour, giving off a red eye shine in certain lights. Her cheekbones high, her chin pointed and pronounced. She was standing close to the light of our head torches, so it swathed her in a gentle luminescence. Only a foot away from us, on powerful, stocky legs. To our immense surprise, the squeaking sound we had heard emanated from our mountain bikes. She was carrying both of them in one hand, as if they were nothing more than tiny little paperweights. She put the mountain bikes next to us, where they collapsed at our feet in a messy, dishevelled heap. She pointed to them, then to the woods. She began speaking fast in a language that neither me or Oscar could understand. She looked at us directly in the eyes, earnestly, with a troubled look. She kept saying 3 words over and over again, with an urgency as if someone was saying something like, "Call the police, call the police, call the police." It had that kind of poignancy to it. She kept pointing to the woods, as if she was exceedingly bothered by something. And that was when we saw lumbering through the woods a very grumpy-looking Bigfoot, who looked as if he was exceedingly bad-tempered and crotchety. You could see he was old. He looked weathered, wilted, and although big, he looked shrunken, as if at one time he was enormous. To us he was still intimidating, but my guess in his prime, instead of being 7 foot, he was taller, wider, more burly. Although I can't be sure, of course, but this was the impression I got that enabled me to reach this conclusion. When he saw us from the distance, he let out a loud, objectionable roar, began to mock charge us as he gathered some heavy stones, throwing them in our direction, but never directly at us. It was as if to say, "Get out of here." The female Bigfoot was young, strong, lofty, majestic, powerful. She pushed our bicycles towards us, shouted a few warning words. We wasted no time in climbing on our bikes and getting the hell out of there. I glanced back briefly over my shoulders to see the female Bigfoot was trying to calm down the belligerent old man, who was oscillating his overlong arms wildly, stamping his feet, while she was almost holding him down with a powerful hand on his shoulders and talking to him intently. I don't think I've ever cycled so fast in my life. Everything that transpired was so surreal. It was as if we were floating on in a dream and would wake up to realise that that was all it was. But it was true. Me and Oscar knew what we had seen. Oscar returned with me to my house, squeezing through my bedroom window. We sat up all night drinking glasses of Mountain Dew, looking at each other with bemused, wide eyes. "Did we really see that?" I asked him. He nodded. "We did see that." "I just can't believe it," I said. "I thought we'd be really afraid if we saw a Bigfoot, but when I saw her, the female was so natural, so nice." "She was nice," Oscar agreed. "You're right about that. She was warning us about the cantankerous old man. Did you see how tiny our bicycles looked in her hand? It certainly gives you a perspective of how huge she actually was. She went to fetch our bicycles to hasten our escape. She must have seen us long before we even knew she was there. She helped us to get away from him." I nodded. She was incredible. "Do you think he would have hurt us?" asked Oscar. "No, I don't think so. He was all bark and no bite. But she clearly wanted us out of his way. She knew that he could have a tantrum, I imagine." I looked at my friend with sparkling eyes. "We saw a Bigfoot! I can't believe it! Now you can never complain that I got you up too late." The following evening, as my mother was placing the lasagna on our plates, along with some salad, we were all seated around the table. I piped, "Mum, I know I'm adopted. I know my real mother's incarcerated." My mother dropped her knife to the floor. Her mouth hung open like a Venus flytrap. She looked astonished. Her frightened eyes grew as wide as saucers. How can you know that?" "I've always known I was adopted, Mum. A wolf always knows when it's been raised by bears." What are you talking about?" "I found the evidence last night in the metal box underneath your bed. I read the letter my mother wrote me. My real name is Richard, but you called me Leith. I like Richard better." My mother mopped her brow. She was beginning to sweat profusely. She kept giving my father anxious glances. I could see tears building up on her lashes. Although I felt guilty about this confrontation, some things needed to be said, and there was no time like the present to get them off my chest. "Son," he interceded, "we never told you that you were adopted for your own good. We deemed it was better if you didn't know, especially since your real mother is in prison." "So were you ever going to tell me?" "I'm not sure," said my mother. "I really wanted to. It was very hard. I was afraid you would love us less if you knew the truth." "That's ridiculous. Of course I love you. You're still my parents, but I wish you'd told me the truth. It's not good to hide things." "You're probably right, son," said my mother, taking me into her arms, the tears now pouring down her face. "Will you forgive us?" "Of course I forgive you." To cut a long story short, I'm now in contact with my birth mother. I visited her a few times. She's a very good woman who made a very grave mistake and is paying a heavy price for it. It is sad how that happens, but there are lots of people incarcerated for the very same reason, as silly mistakes have destroyed many lives. It's piteous, really, if you think about it. I love my real parents enormously, but I think they are relieved that I found out the truth. We all feel as if a weight has been lifted off our shoulders, for now I have found out my true identity and am at peace with it. I often meditate on the fact that if it hadn't been for a random bicycle ride in the middle of the night, after discovering that I was adopted, I may have never met the elusive creature called Bigfoot. I'm so glad I did. Although that grumpy male, well, I wouldn't mind keeping my distance from him. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, my name is Hannah, and my story happened in the early 90s, which is a long time ago now. Isn't it amazing how time flies? I'm from a relatively small rural town, which is very remote and off the beaten track. So the area where I live is naturally very wild, without being disturbed even by loggers. I live in a pretty small cottage-style home with beautiful French windows and whitewashed walls, with a small geometrically styled garden where the flower beds are surrounded with perfect lines of neat hedgerow, and even the bushes on our lands are designed and chiselled to look like great works of art, and they're always admired by the locals. We have a glorious stream trickling and flowing through the bottom of our garden, but it runs through the whole neighbourhood, so that everyone living on the left-hand side of the valley on our street is blessed with this beautiful watery addition to their properties, which would rival any water feature for sure. On the other side of the stream is a high hilly embankment that branches off into a vast area of natural forest that literally stretches back for miles upon miles, and that land, I believe, is publicly owned. At the time of my Bigfoot encounter, I was living alone with my 3 beautiful Burmese cats, and it was the day when one of my cats disappeared that my incredible story was to begin. Basil, my precious blue Burmese cat, was missing, and I loved him so very much. He had the most beautiful, easygoing, laid-back disposition, and he was so gentle and friendly and deeply affectionate, even to strangers. He had recently had a terrible accident when a neighbour had run over his foot, but the vet had bandaged it up after extensive surgery, and he had healed fully from this medical procedure. Now he had seemingly vanished into thin air, and there was no sight or sound of him. He was not a cat given to venturing far from my home, because he loved nothing better than lounging lazily on the couch all day, snoozing or taking a leisurely stroll to the front porch. He never wandered far. So to see that he was missing was very unsettling and upsetting, and something about his disappearance did not feel very right. I knocked on the doors of my nearest neighbours, but no one had seen sight or sound of him. I then drew up some posters with a picture of my cat on them and posted them on as many tree trunks as I possibly could, hoping that someone might have seen him. A day went by with no one getting in touch with me about my missing cat, and I was utterly devastated and began to think that he had succumbed to a deadly fate. Maybe he had been eaten by a lone coyote or a wolf, or someone had run him over and covered up the evidence. You always imagine the worst-case scenarios when it comes to your missing animals. A day later there was a knock at my door, and I opened it to find a young girl standing there. I ushered her in, and she came into my living room holding one of my leaflets in her hands. She looked at me with a serious expression on her face that made my heart sink. Was she going to tell me that my cat was dead, I wondered. Oh, I was dreading what she was going to tell me. "I think I know who stole your cat," she said. I looked at her in utter horror. "You think someone stole my cat?" It never occurred to me that such an idea was even a possibility. The locals in our areas were decent, law-abiding people. Was anyone really capable of something as horrid as this? It seemed highly doubtful. "I don't think it," she said. "I know it, but I cannot prove it. That's the problem." "How do you know they have my cat?" I asked. "Because I've seen her stealing people's pets before. Have you not noticed the number of animals that have gone missing over the last couple of years in our local area? Well, I believe she's responsible for most of these cases." I suddenly remembered an article in the local paper talking about the peculiar disappearances of local pets in the area and how devastated the locals were about their missing animals. Could this girl be right, that someone in our vicinity was stealing our cats and dogs right under our noses? Is this person stealing expensive pedigree animals, like Burmese cats, to sell, I asked? Is that her motivation behind taking my cat? Making money for herself? "I thought that was what she was doing," said the girl. "But the weird thing is that she has been stealing pets that are not just pedigrees, but are also moggies that were got from the local shelter. So she is indiscriminate by the animals she is actually taking." "Will you show me where this woman lives?" I asked. I got into my car with the young girl seated by my side, and we drove down a dirt road and took a turning to the left that spiralled down to a very bumpy dead end. We came to the end of a cul-de-sac, and the girl pointed towards a derelict-looking house that looked like it was falling apart at the seams and had not seen a lick of paint for years. Even the garden was extremely overgrown, with grass 6 feet high, and there were angry-looking weeds sprouting through the foliage and rambling bushes covered with sharp thorns absolutely everywhere. I told the girl to wait in the car, and I got out and opened the white wicker fence, and the creaky door nearly fell off its hinges as I walked up the remnants of what was once a paved pathway that had been taken over by rambling and climbing ivy. As I got to the front door and banged on the knocker, I could see the curtain twitching, as if someone was studying me and was making a decision whether they would answer the door to me or not. I waited for a long while, and nothing happened, and then finally the wood-panelled door squeaked open, and I saw her. She was elderly, thin, and had a mottled, thin, crepey skin covered in black liver spots. She had a long, beak-like nose exactly like a vulture, and dark, horrible, deep-set eyes surrounded by a purplish, shadowy rim. Her tousled silver hair hung around her face in haphazard, bedraggled clumps. Even her clothes reflected the same don't-care attitude of her appearance. She wore a pinafore-style black dress that looked as old and as faded as she was, and wrapped around her shoulders was a very holy brown knitted shawl. "Yes," said the woman, eyeing me with suspicious brown eyes. "What do you want?" she barked in a gruff voice. "Hello," I said. "My name is Hannah. I live at number 3 on Red Dirt Road," I explained, "over on the left-hand side. The cottage-style house, with a green roof and the whitewashed walls. You know the one." "Yes," she said, looking at me with a hostile, defensive look. "I do know the one." I presented her with a copy of my leaflet. "I'm missing my blue Burmese cat called Basil, and I'm looking for him everywhere. I wondered if you might have seen him." "No," said the woman, barely glancing at the picture of Basil. "No, I have not." But the shifty look in her brown, deceptive eyes told me a whole different story, and I could tell immediately that she was lying to me. Also, her body language gave her away, revealing a distinct look of awkward discomfort, as if she was definitely hiding something. I knew in that instant that this woman had my cat. There was no doubt about it in my mind. But the question was, what was I going to do about it? I thought as quickly as I could, and then I asked her, "Can I come in for some water? I'm really parched." "If you must," hissed the woman. Reluctantly, she opened the door to me, but she was not happy with me encroaching on her territory. As I walked inside, my eyes were looking out for any sign of my cat or any domestic animal, but the place was alarmingly quiet, with no sign of any animal life. "Do you have any pets?" I asked. "No," she snapped. "I hate animals. They're not for me, especially cats." I followed her into her kitchen, and she opened a cabinet to get me a glass of water. My attention was diverted to all the glass bottles of strange pickled ingredients on the shelves, and with horror I saw bottles of eyeballs, hearts, kidneys, tongues, and other internal organs, all on visual display, like a large scientific project. I do not believe they were of human origin, but they were disgusting nevertheless, and not what you would expect to see in a kitchen of all places. I couldn't help wondering if these pickled delights were included in her daily diet. No wonder she looked so hideous, I thought. After all, don't they say that you are what you eat? There was a huge witch-like cauldron on the gas hob, and something foul was boiling away heartily, and it smelt like rancid meat. It was utterly disgusting. I drank the water and thanked her as I walked through the passageway and retreated back to my car, looking around to see if I could see any signs of animal life, but there was nothing. "What did she say?" asked the girl as I started up the engine. "She said she hadn't seen my cat, but I knew she was lying." "I told you," said the girl. "I promise you that vile woman is a witch. She definitely is stealing the animals." "Her kitchen is full of pickled animal parts," I said. "I've never seen anything like it in my life. It's peculiar, to say the least." The girl looked at me in utter horror. "You don't think she could be eating the neighbourhood pets?" she suggested. My heart narrowly missed a beat, and I looked at the girl with a horrified, astonished expression on my face. "I never thought of that," I said. "That woman is so odd. I wouldn't put anything past her." "What shall we do?" asked the girl. "We cannot let this woman keep stealing our animals. We've got to stop her. Should we go to the police?" "We haven't got any proof," I said. "You cannot randomly accuse someone without any actual evidence." "Well, why don't we just get some?" said the girl. "We can creep up to her property during the night and investigate the back area of her home, which is where I suspect she's hiding the animals." It sounded like a great idea to me, even though it was hardly legal snooping around someone else's premises, especially at the dead of night. But I just knew in my gut that this hideously ugly witch-like woman had my cat, and the idea of her boiling my pet in that cauldron of hers sent shivers of dread down my spine. It was early fall, and so there was a distinct chill in the air. So we both dressed warmly, and armed with flashlights, I got into my car with the girl, whose name was Jenny, and we parked the car a few yards away from the witch's house. I chose a secluded spot on the side of a large oak tree so that we would not be easily seen. We then proceeded to walk down the bumpy dirt road that was littered with large pebbles, making it precarious to walk down without hitting the stones with our shoes, so that they would invariably shoot across the ground, making awkward tinkering sounds. That was the last thing we wanted to do, to alert anyone to our presence. We finally reached the white wicker fence, which was virtually impossible to open without it making a creaking sound, but somehow we managed to succeed without drawing any attention to ourselves, which was a miracle in itself. We slowly, very quietly closed the gate behind us, and we tiptoed through the long undergrowth, doing our best to avoid the thorny brambles. Finally, we reached the back of the house that was situated yards away from the large forest. Everything about the property was exceedingly creepy, and the whole area was deathly quiet. I noticed that there were no sounds of crickets in the atmosphere, no owls hooting, no barking of neighbourhood dogs, and no sounds of howling coyotes. It really gave me the impression that something wasn't right. Then I saw a huge pile of animal cages, piled one on top of the other, and there were people's dogs and cats in these cages, and some of them were making frightened, whimpering sounds that were terrifying. I was furious. I've never seen such a desperately sad sight in my entire life, because it was utterly horrifying. I could not believe it was possible to be so heinously evil. I was now convinced that this woman was consuming our pets and was completely stark raving mad. I had read articles before of weird serial killers devouring human flesh and engaging in cannibalistic practices, and I had also heard of cats being killed for sacrificial witchcraft rituals, but I'd never heard of anyone eating our pets before. What was bizarre to me was that there was so much wild turkey out there, hogs, deer and rabbit, that could so easily be hunted. Not to mention, one can just go to the local butchers and buy meat. So why would anyone choose to eat our pets? There was no excuse for it. It was utterly bizarre. On one side of the wall, there were 3 singular cages with cats inside, and using my flashlight, I got a glimpse of Basil. He had a look on his face of absolute terror. I opened all 3 of the cats' cages, and all 3 cats shot out like greased lightning, and even Basil shot out past me, not even knowing I was there, because all they wanted to do was flee. I wasn't worried because I knew these cats could find their way home to their owners, and so Basil would be home with me soon, and I was thrilled that I had finally found him. Suddenly we heard a loud crashing sound, and I thought the evil witch was coming out of her back door, so I indicated to my friend that we needed to hide at once. We both hid behind this thick brambling brush, and waited a while to see if we could see any signs of the woman. Suddenly we heard the crashing sound again. It was so loud it reminded me of wheel bin lids clanging together like a huge drum. We could hear something bipedal walking through the undergrowth. If you have lived in the country for as long as I have, you can tell whether you're hearing an animal or a human when they walk past you. The problem was the crunching sound of these feet did not sound like they belonged to a light, thin woman, but instead to something monstrously big and huge, like a rhino or a bear. That was how hefty this person or individual sounded, but they were definitely on 2 feet. I suddenly smelt something really hideous, a smell I shall never forget as long as I live, because it was so hideously vile, so repugnant, and it definitely smelt like skunk. It had that kind of ferocity to it. It was hideous. Then I suddenly heard the terrifying squeaking, meowing and yelping coming from the caged animal as this huge bipedal being approached the stack of cages piled up high against the back wall. The sound from these animals became increasingly more terrifying. Luckily, the old lady had left her outside light on, so we could clearly see the cages containing all the dogs and cats, and the sounds they made was too heartbreaking for words. Then I saw him, and he was massive. This was the owner of the huge footsteps, and at first I thought he was a very big dark brown bear, because he was covered entirely with fur. Yet I could see by the way he was standing was that this creature was no bear. This was confirmed by the long arms that hung well below the knees, and the creature had very visible chunky hands, and not paws. "What the heck is that?" whispered Jenny. "Shh," I whispered. The last thing I wanted was this creature to see us, or worse still, hear us. I heard the back door open, and I saw a small willowy silhouette of the elderly woman, who appeared to nod at this massive, dark, hairy humanoid form, almost as if she was acknowledging him like she would a friend. She then closed the door behind her and ventured back indoors. What on earth was she doing, I wondered, and what was her relationship with this strange, hairy humanoid? The creature went towards the cages and opened up one of the cages to grab a big cat that was hissing at him in terror and wiggling violently in his huge hands. There was no merciful escape for the poor cat, because in one mighty thud and blow it was all over for the poor thing. I apologize, but I just don't want to go into graphic detail about this incident, because I don't think your listeners would want to hear it. It was too deplorable to describe. And as I write, this memory brings tears to my eyes. That was someone's pet, I thought in horror. The creature turned in our direction, but luckily I do not believe he sensed our presence under the full electric outside light. I got an amazing view of him, and this was a beast that was so dreadful that it would fit so perfectly in your darkest nightmares. This hairy humanoid form had a definite ape-like feature to his appearance that was very clearly visible in his greyish long face, with its very distinctive brow ridge, very flat dark nose, slender mouth, and very deep-set dark eyes that at certain angles in the darkness glinted with a demonic red eyeshine. At a guess, this creature was 8 foot tall and 4 feet wide. And what really got my attention was the humongous shoulders, the strange bullet-shaped head, and the evident absence of a neck. I had never seen such a terrifying creature in my entire life, and you could tell by looking at him that he had a menacing presence and energy about him. I could tell that Jenny was utterly terrified. She was shaking so much that even her teeth started to chatter, as if she was freezing cold, but that was clearly not the case. Her eyes were as round as saucers, and her jaw was wide open with utter shock. "What is this thing?" she whispered. "That witch is feeding our pets to him," she whispered. I was frozen in horror as I watched this formidable creature leaving the lady's premises with 5-foot strides on his graceful long legs. And he moved quickly, swinging his arms backwards and forwards, with the dead cat balancing over his shoulders like a loose jersey. "Why could he not kill a squirrel or another wild animal?" whispered my friend. "None of this makes any sense to me." I agreed. It was utterly insane. But the biggest question on my mind was, what on earth was this creature in the first place? Fast forward a day or two. I'm delighted to tell you that I got home to find Basil tucking into his cat kibble, and I gave him a large tin of tuna, which he scoffed in no time at all. It was so wonderful to have him home, and the reunion was incredibly emotional. He did suffer some anxiety after the ordeal, but after a while he bounced back to his usual laid-back self. But he became very suspicious of strangers and never strayed far from the house again. I did call the police and animal services, and the woman received a hefty fine and a written warning, and all the dogs were returned to their owners, and the cats as well. I never told the police that this woman was feeding the local pets to this creature. I knew that would sound crazy. They would never have believed me, and I did not want to sound completely barking mad, because I'm sure my story would have appeared implausible. 2 days after the incident and the reports in our local paper about the woman stealing our pets, I'm not sad to report that she was found lying dead in her house. The medical examiner said that it appeared as if her head had been savagely crushed, and the death was considered to be a possible homicide. I had my theories about what had happened to the woman, and who had killed her. There was one man in our town called Alf. He was a very tough, strong guy, who was as hefty as an ox, and he had a very strong vigilante view about everything. He did not trust the government at all, and he believed that anyone who killed a person need to be sentenced to death. I think he felt that the law did not deal with perpetrators of crime well enough, and with enough toughness. The woman had been guilty of stealing his dog that he was fortunate enough to get back. However, I heard him tell the butcher that this wicked, evil woman deserved to be shot and if he got hold of her, it would be over for her in a second. The following day, she was found dead. My second theory was it was the creature who had come to get another pet to eat, and when he could not get some easy fast food from the woman, in a thunderous rage, he turned around and killed her instead. I did have 3 more questions that bothered me for several long years, until quite miraculously the answers came to me. Question 1, why was the woman serving our pets to this creature? Question 2, why was this seemingly elusive creature who avoided humans not killing wild animals in the area like turkeys, rabbits and squirrels? It did not make any sense to me. He was not physically impaired or impeded in any way. Question 3, what on earth was this hairy humanoid creature in the first place? One day when I was watching a television program about the Chinese markets where the customers eat dogs and cats, these people do the most barbaric things to these animals, and those animals lie down in those cages in utter terror and dread, knowing that they will be next on the chopping block. They even watch their fellow animals being killed in front of their eyes. I was to learn in horror that those terrified animals in those cages are pumping up tons and tons of adrenaline into their bloodstream on a perpetual basis until they are finally butchered. We need the terror, said the Chinese man at the market, and we do this procedure purposely because the more adrenaline in the bloodstream, the tastier the meat. The customers like it this way because the meat is delicious. At that moment, a light bulb switched on in my mind. Could it be the creature liked eating our pets because he loved the adrenaline in the meat? It would be infinitely tastier to him than a squirrel he killed in a few seconds that barely had any traces of adrenaline in the blood. The death would be very quick that way. Maybe the creature was addicted to the adrenaline-infused meat, as we might be addicted to a bar of chocolate. It all began to make perfect sense. I was also able to find out the answer to the final question I had in my mind when I turned into a program called Finding Bigfoot in 2010. And I remember thinking to myself that the elusive creatures these people were looking for and couldn't find was called Bigfoot, was indeed the creature that I saw that night in the fall many years ago. It was the first question that I still could not answer, and that was why would the strange woman go to such extraordinary lengths to feed a Bigfoot our pets? I had heard from a friend who knew the local police officer involved in the case that this strange woman was heavily involved in the occult, and they found a room in her house with a hexagram on the floor, dark candles, strange files with weird ointments inside, bottles of strange herbs, and lots of books on different kinds of spells. So I think we can safely say she was a witch of some kind. A psychologist I once quizzed about people who might eat their pets, or even humans, told me that this has been known to happen, and that we have to accept that we live in a world filled with very strange and weird people, and not everything that goes on behind closed doors is at all normal. So there we are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.